The Rise of the Spanish Empire. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 76 Listing Comments. Before I knew it, the new book has reached 160,000 words and is about to be put on the shelves. The last time it was on the shelves was New Year's Day 23, more than a year ago. In fact, both the previous book and this book have many problems, and the author thanks the readers for their corrections and support. The author hereby promises all book lovers that this book will never be discontinued, abandoned or have a bad ending, and will definitely give everyone a complete ending. Let I start with the planning of this book. The length is expected to be 2.8-3.5 million words, and it will end at the end of World War II, which is around 1930 to 40. After that, there will be a few free extra chapters. All extra chapters will be free in the future. It took about a year and a half to write it, and it would have been almost 26 years by the time it was finished. Precisely because the writing of a novel takes a long time, it is difficult to find book lovers who support it from the beginning to the end. If there are any book friends who have supported the previous book from its release to its completion, the author would like to express his deep gratitude. I'm really grateful. I would also like to thank all the book lovers for their support for this book day, and it is easy to do so when his thoughts are flowing smoothly. Therefore, the rules for adding chapters to this book are as follows. 1. One chapter will be added for every 1,000 monthly tickets. 2. One chapter will be added for every reward of more than 30,000 Kidian coins. And 3 chapters will be added for the leader 3. One chapter will be added for every 100 floors. For specific rules, please see the comments section of the floor 4. One chapter will be added for every 150 investors, starting from 388 investors on September 6th. There is no upper limit on the above rules for adding more chapters. The conditions must be met within 3 days. If you exceed the deadline, the time will be doubled. I hope everyone will supervise. Let me also talk about the plan for updating this book after it is put on the shelves. The current plan is to have 10,000 copies per day between September 6th and September 12th, for a total of 7 days. Because the author expects 500 copies of the first order for this book, whether or not it reaches 500, there will be 10,000 copies per day for 7 days. For first orders above 500, the update period will be extended by 3 days for every additional 150 of first orders, with no upper limit. The first order only counts the number of VIP subscribers within 24 hours of the release of the first chapter. After 24 hours, the author will release the first order situation, so there is no need to worry about the author playing tricks. Anyway, there is no cap on the rules for additional or explosive updates. If you want to see more updates, please support the author, support the genuine version, and give the author some income to survive. Finally, I would like to recommend an old book, The Rise of Australia, a complete foreign historical novel of 3.19 million words. Friends who have not read it can take a look. At the end, I begged my brothers to give me a first order. The author really wants to sell tens of thousands of copies every day. Brothers, please give me some support and keep updating. Available at 12 noon. New chapters will be released after 12 noon. Chapter 77 Hunt. Carlo didn't expect that, after coming to Italy, he would solve most of the financial problems that had been bothering him for a long time. With this funding, there will be basically no need to worry about funding issues for the expansion of steel mills and other factories in the next few years. The Spanish government also hopes to borrow a batch of loans from Italian bankers, and there will be basically no harsh additional conditions, which is already a very good result. If officials couldn't get loans from Italian bankers, other countries would have little hope. The reason why these bankers are willing to lend money to others is that they can obtain enough interest as income through the loans, and they can also make a lot of money through some additional conditions. On the Italian side, thanks to Carlo's connections, Italian bankers should not ask for too much, and Vittorio Emanuele II will not allow those bankers to offer extremely harsh conditions. But if it were in other countries, they would not care about the life or death of the Spanish government. As long as the capitalists can make enough profit from the loans and the government can get some benefits from it, who would care about the damage to the Spanish government? That afternoon, Carlo appeared in a hunting ground outside Rome. This place is more than 30 kilometers away from the city of Rome. After the capital of Italy was moved to Rome, it was designated as a royal hunting area by the Italian royal family and provided for royal members to hunt and play. Carlo, dressed in casual clothes, followed behind Vittorio Emanuele II, along with Crown Prince Umberto and Duke Amadeo. In the dense forest, you can occasionally see some wild animals flashing by. King Vittorio Emanuele II was obviously very fond of such hunting grounds. He took the shotgun from the guard, patiently aimed at the target, and then pulled the trigger. Bang! A wild deer a few dozen meters away fell down, its forehooves still kicking wildly, but it was powerless to save itself. You can try it, Carlo. I hope that more than a year of being a king has not made you forget how to hold a hunting rifle. I don't want my son to not know how to use a musket. Vittorio Emanuele II gestured to Carlo to take the hunting rifle and said with a smile, "With the development of firearms, the proficient use of existing firearms has long become a subject that European aristocrats need to learn from childhood. Traditional elite aristocrats' education requires a wide variety of subjects to be studied, which also reflects the aristocrats' expectations for their children, hoping to train their children into talents. Even in terms of language, in addition to French, which is often used by European aristocrats, English and German are also required to be able to carry out brief communication." Carlo didn't waste any time. He took the hunting rifle from his father, Prince Vittorio Emanuele II, loaded the ammunition, and started looking for his own prey. Bang! After a gunshot, everyone looked over and saw a grey-haired hare forgotten dead. Haha, not bad. It seems you haven't this aspect of education. Victor Emanuele II nodded with satisfaction and said to his child, "A hunting rifle can be temporarily unused, but it cannot be completely unavailable. Only by holding a hunting rifle in one's own hands can a hunter have the most basic sense of security." Carlo, you did well in Spain, but not well enough. You have to know that when the time comes, the only person you can trust is yourself, understand? Being a king is not that easy. Republicans will try every means to push you off the throne. Liberals seem easy to control, but in fact what they want is a who does nothing but have fun. The current Spanish government seems stable, but it is only on the surface. Primo should be almost 60 years old, right? How many years can he last? Child, you should make your own plans. Whether the throne is stable or not depends on yourself. The external forces will be lost one day, and you will have to face the Spanish Republicans and liberal forces alone. Reasons were also seeking autonomy. The difference is that the forces of the Kingdom of Sardinia are still very loyal to Vittorio Emanuele II, and the honor of unifying the Kingdom of Italy is enough to make Vittorio Emanuele II remembered by all Italians. Carlo certainly understood what Vittorio Emanuele II was talking about, and he also understood the logic behind it. The saying that political power comes from the barrel of a gun is always true in any era. If Carlo wants to secure his throne, he must have a large army in his hands. The current royal guard has only about 2,000 people, which is enough to protect the royal palace, but it is simply wishful thinking to want to maintain one's own regime. Only by influence expanding to the Spanish army and gaining the loyalty of most of the troops could his royal power be truly stabilized. Carlo is also thinking about these things and even taking action on them. However, Carlo had too few available personnel at this time, and with both Primo and Serrano, two military leaders, still around, it was not appropriate to promote his confidants in the army. "I know, father. It's just that I don't have enough talent. How about you transfer a few more relevant talents to me from the Turin Military Academy?" Carlo said with a smile. Regardless of how the Italian army performed in World War I and World War II, the graduates trained by the Turin Military Academy at this time were still of a certain level. As for why the Italian army's combat effectiveness was not strong in the later period, it is most likely related to the demoralization of the army. If there is no cohesion among the soldiers, it will naturally greatly affect the combat effectiveness of the army. Italian soldiers seem to be just ordinary people. They lack the courage to fight and die for their country. Naturally, it is impossible for them to burst out with strong will and combat effectiveness when facing the enemy. King Victor Emanuele II looked at his son helplessly, without any sign of anger. I don't even have enough outstanding graduates from the Turin Military Academy, so where can I find a group of graduates for you? Moreover, you are the king of Spain. How can you abandon the Spaniards and use a large number of Italians? Carlo certainly didn't think of making use of the officers trained by the Italian Military Academy. When he heard what his father, Vittorio Emanuele II, said, Carlo immediately started to cry poor again. Father, I also want to train Spanish officers. The problem is that Spain's military academy system is obviously backward and lacks excellent military commanders to teach knowledge to military academy students. How about you lend me some professors from the Turin Military Academy? King Vittorio Emanuele II knew what his son was thinking and said unhappily, the German Empire is the most powerful army country in Europe. If you want to build an officer training system, you might as well cooperate with the Germans. It's the first and seventh day of daily 10,000 words 2,000 words have been updated. Please support. Chapter 78 Meeting Garibaldi. While Carlo and Vittorio Emanuele II were enjoying their royal leisure life, the Spanish officials who came to Italy also began to get busy. The diplomatic visit is not for sightseeing, but to actually solve the problems currently faced by the Spanish government. What are the biggest problems facing the Spanish government right now? First, there is no money, and second, there is not enough foreign capital involved. The development of a country is not that simple. Effective growth cannot be achieved by simply throwing money at it. For example, in terms of industry, industrial growth requires all kinds of factories to spring up all over Spain, which is impossible to rely solely on domestic capital. Although the royal family invested heavily in steel and other industries, it still needed the help of Spanish private capital and some foreign capital to achieve comprehensive growth and expansion. So in addition to negotiating a low-interest loan with the Italian government, Prime Minister Primo also issued another order to the diplomatic delegation, which was to achieve as much Italian capital as possible to invest in Spain, including bidding for the construction of Spanish railways. The kings of both sides tacitly chose not to pay attention to the discussions between the two governments and let the government officials negotiate on their own. After all, the interests of the royal family do not represent the interests of the country. Although the royal families of the two countries are one family, this does not mean that Spain and Italy are one family. Although World War I was known as a war among European royal families, it was actually a conflict among countries due to different interests would cause unnecessary trouble. It would be better to wait for the two governments to negotiate a result. Anyway, as long as it does not affect the interests of the two royal families, it doesn't matter which country the outcome of the negotiation benefits. Carlo spent a relatively relaxing and few enjoyable days with Vittorio Emanuele II, and then decided to meet with the famous Italian figure Garibaldi under the guidance of Giardi. Carlo personally admired Garibaldi very much. If Garibaldi had any selfish motives, it would not have been so easy for Vittorio Emanuele II to become the king of Italy. As one of the heroes who unified Italy, Garibaldi still needed relief from the Italian government in his later years, which proves his selflessness. Of course, the world is different now. Because Garibaldi had already serialized his articles in The Sun, a newspaper founded by Carlo, the royalties he earned were enough to support his family. Garibaldi did not mention any words in support of the Republic or against the monarchy in the stories he wrote, which made King Vittorio Emanuele II of Italy very relieved and relaxed the restrictions on Garibaldi. However, due to his age, Garibaldi still chose to live in seclusion on the island of Caprera, enjoying his leisurely later years. Carlo's purpose of going to Caprera Island to meet Garibaldi was not only to see this famous Italian figure with his own eyes, but also to recruit a few more talents from Garibaldi. Garibaldi had 3 children, including 2 sons. In addition to his second son, Giardi, Garibaldi's eldest son, Menotti, was also Garibaldi's right-hand man during his military service. When it comes to talent, Carlo's attitude has always been that you can never have too much. It would be a great thing if we could recruit some of the talents from the Red Army previously commanded by Garibaldi to go to Spain to work for us. With his own purpose in mind, under the leadership of Giardi and the protection of a guard, Carlo bid farewell to his father, Emanuele II, and headed for Caprera Island. Gianti, how long have you not been back? Carlo looked at the outline of the island that had already appeared in front of him and asked Gianti beside him. About 2.5 years, your majesty. Gianti thought carefully for a while and found that he could not remember when he had been back. I allow you to stay on Caprera Island for a few more days and accompany Mr. Garibaldi. Carlo was quite emotional. After returning to Spain this time, he might not come to Italy again in the next few years. No, your majesty. Gianti shook his head and said, my duty is to protect your majesty. Your majesty's safety is the most important thing. Besides, my father probably wouldn't let me stay. If you leave me alone on Caprera Island, I'll probably end up sleeping on the beach. Garibaldi's life was full of twists and turns, and his two also experienced a lot with him since childhood, including the previous 1,000-man expedition and the Italian unification movement. Gianti was Garibaldi's right-hand man, and had already matured a lot. Besides, Gianti also knew his duties as the commander of the Royal Guards. If he really stayed alone on Caprera Island, the first person to be unhappy would probably be Garibaldi himself. In Garibaldi's very simple residence, Carlo finally met this famous Italian figure. At Carlo's special instruction, this visit to Garibaldi was not announced in advance. This also made Carlo see Garibaldi wearing a simple robe, leaning on a cane in his right hand, looking like an ordinary Italian farmer. Next to Garibaldi was his wife, or rather, Gianti's mother. Because at this time, the two had not yet held a marriage, but were just living together as husband and wife. Father. Gianti spoke first. Carlo's status was noble, so it was impossible for him to be the first to greet him. Gianti could only remind his father quietly to interrupt Garibaldi's thoughts. Hearing someone calling him from behind, Garibaldi turned around and immediately saw Carlo and Gianti beside him. Gianti? This is? His Majesty Carlo. Garibaldi was stunned for a moment, then he immediately came to his senses and stepped forward with his crutches, looking a little excited and a little surprised. Your Majesty Carlo, when did you come? Mr. Garibaldi, it's my honor to meet you. Carlo smiled, stepped forward, shook Garibaldi's hand, and greeted him. Little Carlo, oh no, Your Majesty Carlo, it's my honor to meet you. Garibaldi was a little surprised that the young king who had grown up in front of him was still as polite as he was when he was a child. Have you seen me before? Carlo was not angry at the other party's inadvertent address to him, but was a little curious whether he had seen Garibaldi before. Yes, Your Majesty. When I met His Majesty Emanuele, he was also so approachable. Garibaldi said with some emotion. It's the first and 7th day of daily reading of 10,000 words for, 0.000 words have been updated. Please support. Chapter 79 Minotti. Carlo was stunned. He didn't expect that he had met Garibaldi before. But it doesn't matter. Judging from Garibaldi's current words and attitude, at least he still has a good impression of me. It was enough to have a good impression, which also made it convenient for Carlo to find some talents from Garibaldi. Gianti, why didn't you tell me in advance that His Majesty Carlo was coming? Your Majesty, please forgive me for not being prepared for your arrival and not welcoming you in person. Garibaldi first questioned his son Gianti and then looked at Carlo with an apologetic look. I asked Gianti to keep it a secret, Mr. Garibaldi. You are a hero of the unification of Italy, and all Italians should thank you for your contribution to Italy, Carlo said with a smile, but his words were indeed sincere. In fact, no matter which country it is, people who are selfless and wholeheartedly dedicated to the country are worthy of everyone's admiration. If Garibaldi had even a little bit of selfishness, it would be a question whether the current kingdom of Italy could exist. If Garibaldi had joined forces with Mazzini, who supported the Republic, the unified Italy would probably have become a democratic republic. Your Majesty, is there something important that you suddenly came to see me for? Garibaldi asked curiously. It's not an important matter. Carlo smiled and explained the purpose of his visit, to take advantage of the visit to Italy, to let Gianti go home. I also invite you to go to Spain, to serve as the Dean of the Royal Military Academy of Zaragoza. If you are willing. Garibaldi was stunned for a moment, then smiled and said, "Your Majesty, I'm afraid that I'm powerless in my physical condition. I think life in Caprera is more suitable for me. Besides, an old man with a cane is not suitable to be the dean of a military academy, right? I'm afraid I have disappointed you." Carlo certainly didn't think that Garibaldi would come out. Seeing that Garibaldi rejected his invitation, Carlo immediately said, "Do you have any suitable candidates to recommend to me? Not only does the military academy need a large number of professors, but my guards are also short of some commanders." Seeing Carlo immediately revealing his true purpose, Garibaldi knew that Carlo's target was not him at all. "Your Majesty, you have the wrong person for this. You should go to the professor of the Royal Military Academy of Turin. I don't have any military talent here," Garibaldi said with a wry smile. It wasn't that Garibaldi was unwilling to help Carlo, but none of the old guys he knew were suitable to go to Spain. Some old guys had strong Republican ideas. "Garibaldi?" Carlo smiled and said the candidate he had long favored. "I have a position here that is very suitable for Minotti, and he can definitely give full play to his talents." "Haha, it turns out that your Majesty has set his sights on Minotti." Garibaldi suddenly realized that Carlo's target was actually his eldest son. But it's not surprising. After all, the second son, Giardi, has been Carlo's subordinate for several years. It's normal for Carlo to have a certain understanding of Minotti. As long as Minotti is willing, I certainly have no objection, Garibaldi said with a smile. He was very open-minded and would not confine his sons to him. In fact, Garibaldi knew the abilities of his two sons. Although their military talents were not that outstanding, they were definitely above the standard. What's more, both of them are still young. If they are trained a little, they may even reach the level of general. This is why Garibaldi agreed to let Giardi follow Carlo. The reason why he had rejected the reward from King Vittorio Emanuele II was entirely because such a reward lacked sincerity and was more of a surveillance. If it was an invitation from Vittorio Emanuele II, Garibaldi would most likely refuse it, but if it was an invitation from Carlo, Garibaldi thought it was worth a try. After all, the fact that Giardi can serve as the commander of Carlo's royal guards has already proven Carlo's trust in Giardi. This kind of trust from the monarch is precious, and it will be more promising under such circumstances without having to worry about intrigues within the government. After hearing Carlo's invitation, Minotti nodded in agreement without any hesitation. Garibaldi was not surprised at all, and even looked like he had expected this. "Mr. Garibaldi, can I take Minotti with me?" Carlo said with a smile. "Take them away. They shouldn't have to live with me in Caprera. This shouldn't be their fate." Garibaldi nodded, with a look of reluctance and relief in his eyes. "Giardi, Minotti, since you have chosen to serve His Majesty Carlo, you should abide by your duties, and avoid contact with those Republicans." Garibaldi himself suffered greatly from his contact with the Republicans. When he was young, Garibaldi met Mazzini, and was exposed to Republican ideas. Although Garibaldi later had his own ideas, his contact with the Republicans during this period had a profound impact on Garibaldi, making him a Republican traitor in the eyes of the monarchy. At this point, Garibaldi did not think that the Republic was right and the monarchy was wrong, which was why he chose to support the Kingdom of Sardinia to unify Italy. There is no right or wrong in a unitary system, and monarchy has its merits in some aspects. However, the current Republicans obviously cannot see this point. They hate the monarchy so much that they are always thinking about overthrowing the monarchy and establishing a monarchy republic. Are they really doing the right thing? Garibaldi doesn't think so. If Italy had not yet been unified, it would be fine to have other ideas about a unified Italy. But now Italy has been unified and has a relatively stable and peaceful development environment. Now that the Republicans have jumped out to disrupt the Italian government, aren't they destroying the Italy that was unified with great difficulty? It was precisely because of this that Garibaldi became somewhat disappointed with the Republic, and this also influenced Giardi and Minotti. The reason why Garibaldi reminded his two sons to stay away from the Republic in front of Carlo was also to show Carlo his attitude. That is, although he had been exposed to the Republic before, he now has nothing to do with the Republic, and his sons will not get close to the Republic. It's the 1st/7th day with 10,000 new views per day, and it has been 6,10,000 days. Please support. Chapter 80 Cooperation Agreement. Had successfully won over Minotti, was in a good mood. Under Garibaldi's invitation, he enjoyed a simple, but authentic Italian lunch. Although Caprera Island is not a big island, it is an island after all, and there is no shortage of seafood. In fact, Garibaldi's life on Caprera Island was basically based on hunting and fishing, supplemented by reading. Because of his special status, Garibaldi rarely received guests, which made him look very lonely. The good news is that after Garibaldi published his articles in the Sun and earned royalties, at least he didn't have to worry about his daily living expenses. I usually farm, fish, and hunt, and I have enough food and meat to eat, so I can be considered free and easy. Carlo was relieved. After all, he had forced Garibaldi's 2 sons to work for him. If Garibaldi didn't live a good life, Carlo would really feel guilty. Fortunately, Garibaldi had the company of his wife, and his daughter and son-in-law would visit him from time to time, so he was not lonely. The time of reunion was always short, and Carlo could not stay on Caprera Island for long. That afternoon, Carlo boarded the departing ship and abducted Garibaldi's eldest son Minotti. Carlo actually had other plans for Minotti. The matter about the African expedition team has been mentioned before. Carlo wants to form a formal African expedition team. The expedition team must have an armed force, at least to be able to protect the expedition team as it travels through the dangerous Africa. At this time, the explored areas in Africa were only some coasts and outskirts, and there were still large tracts of land that had not been touched by the great powers. There must be a large number of indigenous African tribes in these unknown lands, and it is inevitable that some of them are more xenophobic and may even actively attack the expedition team. However, the African expedition was still very dangerous. Although the native Africans were not in great danger, the unknown geographical environment and some bacteria and viruses that Europeans had never encountered were the real dangers in Africa. So Carlo would not force it. If Minotti was willing, he would become the leader of the African expedition. If not, there were also positions in the guards for him to choose from. It was already evening when we returned to Rome from Caprera Island. Carlo wanted to go to bed early, but unexpectedly, government officials found him soon and reported on the negotiations with the Spanish government several days to 10 days, but I didn't expect that after 2 days of negotiations, we would have preliminary results. We only needed to work out some details before we could basically sign the agreement. What the Spanish government needs now is funds and some industrial technology. On this point, the Italian government is still willing to cooperate with the Spanish government. After all, Spain is not a powerful country and cannot pose a threat to Italy for the time being. The cooperation between Spain and Italy can also help Italy mitigate the threat from France. After all, the unification of Italy was achieved by successively seizing Venice and Rome from the Austro-Hungarian Empire and France. In fact, it cannot be said to be robbing, it is more like picking up a bargain. However, these 2 regions were indeed the sphere of influence of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and France, and the unification of Italy was bound to affect these 2 countries. As Carlo expected, the Italian government agreed not to attach some harsh conditions to the loan, but would not provide interest-free loans, only low-interest loans. There is no result yet on the loan share, but it is unlikely to be too much. After all, Italy's economic situation is not very good. Carlo estimated that the loan Italy could provide to Spain would be between 50 million lire and 100 million lire, or about £2 million to £4 million. It is very easy for Italian capitalists to raise this money. It will not affect Italy's development and can actually help Spain. It is a win-win situation. As for Italy's industrial technology, it can also be provided to Spain, but it requires the purchase of real money. Carlo had no objection to this. After all, no country's industrial technology was obtained for free. They had to either develop it themselves or purchase technology from other countries at a high price. Spain is relatively lacking in the latest steel-making technology, steam turbine technology and chemical production materials. Compared with countries like Britain, France, and Germany, Italy is not an industrial power, but for Spain, Italy has enough experience in industry for Spain to learn from. There is also Italy's military technology, such as the rifles, that Italy has just introduced, and the technology for producing ironclad ships. Italy's technology in naval construction is not weak at all, and can be considered first class in Europe. In the 1880s, Italy had the technological level to build ironclad ships of tens of thousands of tons, which was definitely top notch at that time in history. However, because Italy's national strength has always been at the bottom level among the great powers, and the country is located in the Mediterranean, the development of the navy is very limited, so the size of the Italian navy has never been too large. This is also the biggest law in Italy's geographical location. All of its coastlines are located in the Mediterranean. Even if it builds a huge navy, after the British blocked the Strait of Gibraltar and the Suez Canal respectively, the Italian navy can only roam in the Mediterranean, and cannot go out at all. The good news is that ironclad ships have only been around for more than a decade, and Italy's technology in this area is not that mature. The Italian government did not have much objection to Spain's desire to introduce these industrial technologies, but it would not give these technologies to the Spanish government for nothing. Carlo did not completely count on these technologies from Italy. Carlo's expectation for Spain was to be able to introduce advanced technologies from European powers, fully understand these technologies, and research more advanced technologies based on them. At present, it is only the stage of introducing technology, and Carlo certainly welcomes all who come. After all, the technology in Italy is different from that in other countries, and learning more technology will be more helpful for developing new technology on this basis in the future. After taking a quick look at the cooperation agreement with Italy, Carlo felt that there was no problem, so he asked the officials who came to report to continue to promote cooperation with Italy. At present, the purpose of this diplomatic visit has been basically achieved, and this diplomatic visit is quite successful. If we can attract some talents from Italy to return to Spain, it will be even more perfect. 10,000 words a day 1/7 days, 8,10,000 words have been updated today. Please support. Chapter 81 Camillo Gorky. In fact, as early as the first day of arriving in Italy, Carlo asked Cardinal who was accompanying him to look for various talents that could be used in Italy. Carlo has no industry restrictions for talents. No matter if they are physics, chemistry, mechanics, or medicine, as long as they can help Spain, they are within Carlo's scope of recruitment. The standard for attracting talent is still the same: a house in Madrid, a high-paying job, and a check for 5,000 pesetas. If the family has a family, they will also settle the family and provide educational resources for their children. With this whole set of things going on, not many people would be able to resist the temptation, unless they were scientists who were already wealthy. This is like the president of a country in the future invites you to work abroad, and not only does your annual income reach millions, but he also gives you a check for $500,000 before you leave. Ordinary people would most likely be tempted. Attracted by such generous conditions, Carlo soon received a report from Caddy that the first group of talents willing to go to Spain were ready. When Carlo saw the length of the list, he realized how attractive the conditions he offered were to people of that era. The entire list has less than 100 people, including professors from famous Italian universities and well-known scientists, surname at the end famous. The name Carlo also leaves a certain impression. If Carlo remembers correctly, it seems that this guy named Gorky has won the Nobel Prize in medicine. However, Carlo could not remember the specific person, but he only remembered that this guy was quite famous in Italy. Camillo Gorky? Carlo looked at Cardinal and asked, "Is he a medical researcher?" "Yes, Your Majesty." Camillo graduated from the medical school of the University of Pavia and is now a doctor at St. Mattia Hospital. Cardinal replied quickly. Carlo nodded. The Nobel Prize had not yet been awarded. As a Nobel Prize winner, Camillo probably had not yet demonstrated his abilities and was probably just an ordinary doctor. Have all these people been arranged? Carlo asked. The delegation will leave Italy in a few days. I hope they can leave with us. Batch. They should be able to go to Spain within a month. Carlo was a little embarrassed. He didn't expect that he would take away hundreds of talents from Italy at once. However, Considering that these talents are very important to the development of Spain, Carlo was not so embarrassed. Anyway, Italy is a big country with a lot of business, and it doesn't lack these hundreds of talents. Unlike Spain, there is a shortage of people in all kinds of industries, except for farmers, who are the largest number of people. Try not to attract the attention of the Italian government when recruiting talents. Carlo instructed, although this will not violate Italian law, it will damage the good relationship between Spain and Italy. Spain's future development still needs Italy's help, and I hope this can be done more secretly. The good news is that the people on the list are not too famous, and as long as they act secretly, they will basically not attract the attention of the Italian government. After all, Italy has a lot of immigrants, and these talents are mixed in with the immigrants and basically will not be discovered. The Italian government will not specifically investigate the reasons why talent left. After all, Italy has a lot of such talents, and what it really lacks are those scientists who are already famous and have relevant research results. If Camillo had won the Nobel Prize, the Italian government would certainly have noticed him and tried to prevent him from emigrating. But at that time, Camillo was just an ordinary doctor who graduated from an ordinary university, and whether he immigrated or not was not that important to the Italian government. As long as Cadire's actions are not so above board and he doesn't take away too many talents at one time, the Italian government will turn a blind eye, even if it finds out. I understand, Your Majesty. These people went to Spain through legal immigration channels, and the subsequent talents will not go directly to Spain, but to France or other places for transit. The Italians will not notice it. Caddy nodded and replied to Spain at the same time. The best way is to transfer through France or other places. Anyway, the Italian government will not know whether these people went to France or Spain. Prepare a detailed file of Camillo Gorky for me, and bring him to see me tomorrow. Carlo ordered. Being able to win the Nobel Prize proves that Camillo himself has quite good abilities. Spain also lacks this kind of medical talent. If it can be introduced and trained, Spain will be able to make considerable progress in medicine in the future. Carlo does not underestimate the importance of medicine. Carlo deeply understood how backward the medicine of that era was. Whether for his own life safety or for the sake of all Spaniards, it was necessary to vigorously develop medicine and medical technology. Medical research can also bring in enough income. There is no shortage of markets for life-saving antibiotics like penicillin. Once an important drug like penicillin is developed, the income from exporting the drug alone will be enough for the royal family to no longer worry about having no money to spend, and they can also cheat other countries at the same time. Why not do it? Yes, Your Majesty. Caddy naturally did not ask any more questions about Carlo's order. He knew that his mission was to faithfully execute orders, which was his duty. Carlo waved his hand to let Cadia leave, and looked out the window. Carlo already had an idea in mind, which was to establish an institution similar to the Nobel Prize to honor and reward the famous scientists of this era. As these scientists came to receive their honors and awards, Carlo was able to easily get in touch with them and lure them to work in Spain. Of course, this is just a concept, and it is still difficult to realize it. After all, Carlo's purpose of attracting talents will be discovered by other countries. If every country sets up similar rewards to increase the importance of talents, it will be a bit like shooting itself in the foot for Carlo. After all, Spain can only expand its talent pool by attracting foreign talents. It's the 1/7th day of daily updates of 10,000,000 words. I have updated 10,000,000 words today. I have successfully completed the task. Please support me. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 80. To return to China. The issues of funding and talent have been almost resolved, and Carlo's diplomatic visit to Italy has come to an end. Accompanied by his brother, Crown Prince Umberto, and Italian Prime Minister Giovanni, Carlo boarded a cruise ship back to Spain, taking with him an interest-free loan of 10 million lire and hundreds of talents. Only a few of the scientists were arranged to travel on the same ship, while the others would travel to Spain on different ships at different times. On the ship, Carlo also met one of the talents he had focused on, Camillo Gorky, a future Nobel Prize winner. No matter how outstanding Camillo Gorky's achievements in the field of medicine were, he was only a 27-year-old doctor who had just graduated from college a few years ago. When he met Carlo, Camillo Gorky seemed very reserved, and he didn't even dare to look Carlo in the eye. "Don't be nervous, Mr. Gorky." Carlo smiled and said, "Did you graduate from the medical school of the University of Pavia?" "Yes, Your Majesty. After graduation, I worked at the San Matteo Hospital and devoted myself to the research of neurological diseases." Camillo Gorky nodded and answered very respectfully, "Excellent, Mr. Gorky." Carlo smiled. There are not many medical workers in Spain who are engaged in research on the nervous system. This time he is considered to have picked up a treasure. Spain also has corresponding medical schools. These medical schools. Carlo thought about it and arranged Gorky's work. When the Royal Spanish Academy of Sciences is established, you can also apply to join the Royal Academy of Sciences and engage in medical research. Any researcher who joins the Royal Society can apply for a project research grant from the society to help your research. I will have someone arrange accommodation for you, preferably one that is close to your workplace. Mr. Gorky, welcome to Spain. Thank you, Your Majesty. It is an honor for me to come to Spain. I will devote myself to my research to thank Your Majesty for your trust in me. Camillo Gorky nodded quickly to express his gratitude to Carlo. Although Camillo Gorky showed extraordinary talent during his medical school years, Italy did not attach great importance to medical talents. If Camillo Gorky wanted to become a professor at his alma mater, the University of Pavia, he had to make some breakthroughs in his research projects and gain a certain reputation. Carlo made him a professor at the Spanish medical school and allowed him to apply for a prestigious scientific research organization like the Royal Academy of Sciences of Spain, which shows his trust in him. Of course, Mr. Gorky, if you have friends at the University of Pavia, you can invite them to Spain. I welcome medical research talents like you, and they can enjoy similar treatment as you. Please rest assured that, as long as you have sufficient ability, I will provide sufficient research funds for your medical research, and will not interfere too much in your research. The progress of medicine is beneficial to the whole world. I hope we can jointly promote the progress of human medicine, so that people all over the world can enjoy more. Camillo Gorky agreed, but was afraid that he would be blamed by Cano if he failed to recruit people. So he quickly added, "But I'm not sure if anyone would be willing to come to Spain from afar. I will try my best." Carlo smiled. The relationship between these scientific researchers was not that complicated, and maybe Camillo Gorky could really recruit people. After all, the conditions offered by Carlo are among the best in the whole of Europe. They may not be so attractive to top scientists, but they are still very attractive to ordinary scientists. The fleet is docked in Valencia and can return to the capital Madrid by train. As for why he did not choose Barcelona in Catalonia, it can only be said that the separatists here are not peaceful. For his own safety, Carlo prefers to choose Valencia as a stop. After a long and bumpy train ride, Carlo finally returned to the capital, Madrid. Although there were relatively complete railways and trains in this era, the speed of the trains was really too pitiful. Currently, the mainstream train speed is maintained at 20 to 30 km per hour, and only particularly flat and straight railways can maintain a speed of around 30 km per hour. Even the carriage Carlo was riding in was specially modified. It not only had a comfortable and luxurious large sofa, but also a kitchen and bedroom, as well as meeting rooms and offices. But at this speed, it takes more than 10 hours to get from Valencia to Madrid, not to mention a slightly longer journey. Currently, Spain's railways basically connect several large cities and key areas. If you want to travel around these cities, it will take at least several days. This is also the reason why Carlo has always been reluctant to go out. Whether on land or at sea, a journey of hundreds of kilometers takes too long and is really inconvenient. Carlo is also looking forward to the birth of cars and airplanes. When these two technologies are truly commercialized, transportation will be completely reformed, and going out will be comfortable and convenient. The visit to Italy lasted just over half a month, and Madrid did not undergo many changes. Along the way from Valencia to Madrid, you can see that many factories on the outskirts of Madrid are constantly expanding, and there are also large tracts of farmland between cities that are shining with golden light. It seems that this year will be a year of double harvest for industry and agriculture. Carlo was in a good mood. At present, it seemed that Spain's development was going quite smoothly, although it would not increase the overall national strength too much all at once. This steady improvement was also pleasing. Along the way, we can see the Spanish people showing smiles. People are enjoying their current life from the bottom of their hearts. After reducing various heavy taxes, a large number of Spanish farmers can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Although they still couldn't live a good life, it was better than before. At least the Spanish farmers could keep most of their food in their own hands, whether they sold it for income or kept it as food, which made people feel at ease. 10,000 words per day, 2/7 days, 2,10,000 words updated. Please support. I have a piece of news to report to you all. The first collapsed order, only 300 plus. The author is half disappointed. The current performance of this book is much worse than the previous one. It depends on whether the follow-up can pick up. However, the author has not considered having a bad ending. Since the book has been started, he still has to finish it, and just regard it as a way to accumulate experience. Chapter 83, Suitor a Billion. As soon as he returned to Madrid, Carlo couldn't wait to hand over more than 100 Vittorio rifles purchased from Italy to the royal arsenal for imitation, and tried to understand the principles behind them. No matter how successful reform and development are, military strength is a standard for measuring whether a country is strong. Spain is not currently suitable for developing its navy, so it can only focus on the development of its army, and try to have a first-class army in Europe. Because Spain's population is far smaller than that of European powers, the only thing it can focus on at the moment is the advancement of its weapons and equipment. If Spain had been able to equip itself with advanced rifles and machine guns in large quantities before the European powers, its army would at least be no less superior to any other country in terms of quality. By establishing the strength of the Spanish army through several battles, Carlo and the Spanish government will be more confident in their diplomatic activities. After all, to put it bluntly, whether a country can have influence at the diplomatic level depends on its comprehensive strength, especially its military capabilities. If a country's military is in a mess, no matter how eloquent its diplomats are, they will be helpless in the face of other powerful powers. National dignity is built on the edge of a knife, and truth is only within the range of cannons. If Spain wants to become strong, military strength is indispensable and even more important, while developing industry and economy. When it comes to weapon design, Carlo actually pays more attention to the research and development of machine guns than rifles. Especially in colonial wars, a few machine guns were generally enough to face thousands of indigenous troops, something that previous colonial powers had never thought of. When it comes to the development of machine guns, the United States is definitely far ahead. The United States currently has a hand-cranked Gatling gun, which has various problems in use, but at least it achieves far more powerful firepower output than a rifle for research by military factories. As for the 10 million lire interest-free loan borrowed from Italy, Carlo decided to invest it all in the construction of the factory. There is no difference between building a factory and making money lying down. It is just a matter of how much money is made. It can also create thousands of jobs for Spaniards, which is a win-win situation. The comfortable days did not last long. Prime Minister Primo and Army Minister Serrano came together and brought Carlo unexpected news. That is, a small-scale rebellion broke out in Ceuta. This rebellion was obviously not the reason why Primo and Serrano asked to see Carlo. Such a small-scale rebellion could be solved by the local colonial army, and such news was not even qualified to be reported to the royal government. What really attracted Primo and Serrano's attention was that Spain could take this opportunity to launch another invasion of Morocco. Morocco is across the strait from Spain and is the closest African country to Spain. As early as the reign of Queen Isabella, a colonial war broke out between Spain and Morocco, and Spain occupied the northern Moroccan cities of Tetuan and Ceuta. although the Moroccan government of the time was defeated because the British did not want to see Spain have a strong force near Gibraltar. Spain only gained 2 small cities under the intervention of the British. Now, 10 years have passed since that war, and the British are facing also problems at home. Prime Minister Primo believes that this is a good opportunity to launch a large-scale invasion of Morocco. The reason for coming with Serrano was naturally to persuade Carlo to launch a colonial war against Morocco. This was also the tacit understanding reached by the 3 Spanish giants. In such major events, Primo had to consider Carlo's attitude in exchange for Carlo's full support for the reform. Primo did it was about the same size as Spain, which was really attractive. In Carlo's plan, Morocco must be taken. It is the only land that Spain can localize, and it is also the sphere of influence that Spain must obtain if it wants to become a great power. But just as Spain did not gain much benefit in the last colonial war, the British would not allow Spain to own such a large piece of land near Gibraltar. If they occupied a large area of land along the northern coast of Morocco, Spain's territory would once again surround Gibraltar, and the British plan in Gibraltar would be in vain. Your Majesty, I think it is feasible to start a war at this time. Seeing Carlo's hesitation, Primo stepped forward and persuaded him. 10 years ago, the Isabel government was able to defeat Morocco, and our current army can certainly defeat Morocco again. Moreover, even if we cannot obtain the large tracts of land in northern Morocco, we can take the opportunity to announce our claims to African land. If the British do not want us to acquire northern Morocco, then they will have to agree to our expansion in other parts of Africa. Otherwise, they will have to bear the consequences of our complete surrender to France. If we were to say which countries are most reluctant to see Spain siding with Germany, the first one is France, and the second is Britain. After France's defeat, it lost important industrial areas such as Alsace and Lorraine, and its overall strength was no longer as good as that of the integrated German Empire. Moreover, the French had to pay the Germans 5 billion francs in compensation, which was simply angel capital for Germany's industrial development. Facing the increasingly powerful German Empire, it was impossible for the British to be unprepared. If there was news that Spain had completely turned to Germany and France was being attacked from both north and south, the British would definitely not be able to sit still. Not to mention that Italy and Germany are also allies. If a war really breaks out, France might be attacked from 3 sides. After all, in order to unify Italy, the Kingdom of Sardinia at that time ceded the 2 important regions of Savoy and Nice to France. Just look at the surnames of the Italian royal family to know how important the Savoy region is. This is the birthplace of the Italian royal family. It is simply impossible to say that Italy has no thoughts about the 2 pieces of land that it was forced to cede. Once France is faced with a situation of being sandwiched, Italy will definitely get involved. Under such circumstances, the British absolutely did not want to see the French being directly defeated. If we want to maintain a balanced situation on the European continent, we must ensure that Spain does not side with Germany. This is why Primo is confident in exchanging interests with the British. After all, although Spain was not strong, it was not that afraid of the British. If a war really broke out, the blockade at sea did not have such a big impact on Spain, because Spain did not have many colonies at that time. If the British wanted to blockade a large area of Spanish waters, they would have to mobilize a large fleet. Even if the British could withstand such a huge consumption, other European countries might not remain indifferent. As for whether the British would invade the Spanish mainland, there was no need to worry about it. Primo was confident that he could make the British come back without returning, and in terms of land warfare, it would be better for the British to stand aside. Day 2/7 of 10,000 words per day, 4,210,000 words updated. The remaining 3 updates may be later, but they will definitely be finished by night. Chapter 84 Colonization Plan. How many troops can we deploy to Morocco now? Carlo asked after thinking carefully for a moment. Seeing that Carlo had an idea, Serrano quickly replied, 20,000 Spanish troops are ready to go at any time, Your Majesty. If we add the troops we have deployed in Ceuta and Tetuan, there are about 30,000 troops that can be mobilized, which is enough to deal with the Moroccan army. Ceuta and Tetuan were Moroccan cities occupied by Spain by force, so naturally more troops were needed to suppress them. Spain also regarded these two cities as bridgeheads for colonizing Morocco. Whether it was during the reign of Queen Isabel or now, the garrisons in these two cities have never been reduced. What does the government plan to do? Carlo looked at Primo. Make the situation in Ceuta more lively, so that it can affect the entire Moroccan region. Primo smiled and said, as long as the rebellion of these Moroccans causes casualties to Spanish civilians, it is time for our army to declare war on Morocco. The Moroccan government cannot escape responsibility for the Moroccan rebellion. As long as there are casualties among Spanish civilians, Spain will have sufficient reason to intervene militarily in the situation in Morocco. Once a war breaks out, the final outcome will no longer be determined by the Moroccan government. If the great powers did not intervene, it would not be impossible to directly turn Morocco into a colony. Anyway, it was quite convenient for Morocco to rebel, since it was close to the Spanish mainland. By continuously squeezing Morocco, Spain's industrial construction and economic growth can be accelerated, and domestic conflicts can be diverted. Very good, let's do it. Carlo nodded, and no longer hesitated. As you wish, Your Majesty. Primo smiled and nodded, and walked out of the palace with Serrano. Although Spain was not a great power, its desire for colonies was no less than that of the great powers. As the world's first empire on which the sun never sets, Spain once had a large number of colonies. Although there are only a few colonies now, the Spanish government, including Prime Minister Primo, still has a desire for colonies. This was also the norm for European countries during this era. If Spain and Portugal had seen the huge income from colonization during the Great Colonial Era, then the prosperity of the British Empire had made European countries' ambitions for colonization continue to expand. Fact that countries like Portugal and Belgium had colonies in Africa is enough to prove the influence of colonialism on European countries of this era. It can quickly make a country rich without too much investment. When Primo and Serrano walked out of the palace, Carlo called the butler Lauren. Primo and Serrano's desire for Morocco also reminded Carlo that, although Africa was very large, almost all the great powers focused their attention on this continent. If Spain had not participated in the division of Africa earlier, perhaps all that would be left for Spain in the future would be uninhabited deserts and uninhabited primeval forests. Africa has an area of 30 million square kilometers, with numerous mineral resources and inestimable economic value. As long as Spain can occupy a part of Africa, it will be a great help. Since Morocco is already under the watchful eye of the government, Carlo naturally shifted his target to other parts of Africa, such as Congo, which Belgium once acquired in history. There are many reasons why Belgium was able to obtain Congo, but in the final analysis, several European powers did not want the other party to obtain this land. The King of Belgium also happened to appear at this time, and began to explore and occupy Congo. Compared with Congo being occupied by other powers, Belgium, which has obviously weaker overall strength, naturally poses no threat. It is precisely because of this that this land eventually fell into the hands of Congo, allowing Congo to snatch this piece of fat meat from many great powers. How big was the Congo colony that Belgium acquired? It had a total area of 2.34 million square kilometers and was rich in mineral resources. Congo's copper reserves are about 75 million tons, accounting for 15% of the world's total reserves. Cobalt reserves are about 4.5 million tons, accounting for 50% of the world's total reserves, and tantalum mud reserves are about 30 million tons, accounting for 80% of the world's total reserves. In addition, Congo also has 206 million carats of diamond reserves and extremely rich iron ore, non-metallic minerals and other resources. In addition to minerals, Congo also has large reserves of oil and natural gas, and its economic value is definitely far beyond that of ordinary colonies. Of course, what makes Carlo even more excited is that Congo has a large amount of uranium mines, and these uranium mines are of extremely high purity. Uranium-235 extracted from uranium ore is the main raw material for making atomic bombs. If Congo can be occupied, it will be of great help to Spain in its future research and development of atomic bombs. Uranium ore with higher purity can help Spain better extract uranium-235, which is very important for Spain's future strategic deployment, and is no less important than Congo's other mineral resources. Apart from anything else, these extremely pure uranium ores alone made Carlo decide to take over Congo at all costs. At present, Spain's biggest enemy in taking over Congo is actually Belgium, or rather, King Leopold II of Belgium. Because King Leopold II of Belgium did not use government funds in the process of colonizing Congo, all expenses came from the property of the Belgian royal family. This also led to Leopold II successfully turning Congo into his own territory after gaining rule over Congo. Carlo did not think that he would lose to Leopold II in this colonial struggle. After all, he could also rely on the Spanish government, which was far stronger than Belgium. Even without rising to the national level, Carlo was confident that he could surpass Leopold II. By the time Spain's 5-year industrial development plan was completed, Carlo's factory had already made a lot of money. At least in terms of spending money, Carlo was not afraid of Leopold II. Anyway, with the vision from the future and huge capital, Carlo could always earn enough money. For example, Benz and others were conducting engine research. Once the car was manufactured, and the production cost was greatly reduced through assembly line production, the sales of the car would be enough for Carlo to no longer worry about funding. How much wealth did Leopold II have? How much did he dare to use to fight against Carlo for colonization? When Carlo explored the Congo region earlier than Leopold II, it was already destined that Leopold II would lose in this colonial struggle. It's the second 7th day of daily updates, and 6,200/10,000 have been updated today. Chapter 85 Expedition. Butler Lauren, how is the situation with the foreign explorer I asked you to find? Is there a suitable candidate? Carlo asked Butler Lauren as he walked in. I was just about to report to you, Your Majesty. Butler Lauren replied, I found a very suitable candidate in Spain. Here is his relevant information. Butler Lauren handed over a document and introduced Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz, 38 years old this year. He owns an African expedition team in Guinea and often deals with indigenous tribes in Africa. He has considerable experience in this regard. Carlo nodded, took the information, flipped through a few pages, and found that it indeed met his requirements. In addition to actual exploration in the Congo region, this African expedition team also needs to build good relations with the local indigenous tribes and establish so-called trade treaties with them. Of course, in addition to the trade treaty, it is also necessary to use means to make them recognize that the land is Carlo's private property and create opportunities for Carlo to obtain the land. Butler Laurent recommended Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz because of his long stay in Guinea and frequent contact with African indigenous tribes, which was exactly what Carlo valued. As the deputy captain and actual person in charge of the expedition, his other abilities may be a little weak, but his experience of living in Africa and interacting with indigenous tribes is very important. Currently, European countries' exploration of Africa is limited to the outermost coasts, and they have not colonized deep into the African continent. There are various reasons for this, one of the most important being the complexity and danger of Africa's terrain. Carlo's target is the largest of the many virgin forests in Africa, which is extremely complex and dangerous. The primeval forests in the Congo Basin are not only the largest primeval forests in Africa, but also the oldest primeval forests, and are known as the lungs of Africa. In the second year, we will receive news that the expedition team has been wiped out. Have you investigated it? I hope that the expedition team we form will have rich experience, not amateurs put together at the last minute. Carlo looked at Butler Lauren and asked. They did not receive support from the Guinea colonial government. They gave up their in-depth exploration of Guinea and returned to mainland Spain after a conflict with nearby indigenous tribes. During their expedition, they did have in-depth contact with the local African indigenous tribes, and these can be guaranteed. After hearing that Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz's experience was confirmed to be true and effective, Carlo sighed with satisfaction and said, "Let him come to see me sometime. I hope this African explorer will not let me down." Based on his identity and nationality, Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz is definitely the most suitable candidate. He himself was an Orthodox Spaniard, and the places he and his expedition team passed through were more able to declare Spain's sovereignty. Moreover, domestic explorers do not have to worry about whether their exploration activities will be leaked. By the time other countries discover Spain's exploration of the Congo region, Spain's colonial exploration has already achieved certain results. Carlo is not afraid, even if other powers follow suit, because the participation of one power will attract the attention of all powers. By then, the major powers will restrain each other, and Congo will eventually fall into the hands of non-power countries. Moreover, there are still large tracts of land in Africa that have not been divided up by the great powers, and Carlo does not think that other great powers will compete with him for the more dangerous Congo colony, rather than occupying and dividing up the land on the African coast. After all, it is still unknown what mineral resources Congo has at this time. If you spend a lot of money to grab a piece of barren land with nothing on it, it would be a wasteland. Butler Lauren nodded and went to prepare what Carlo had asked. After Butler Lauren left, Carlo began to think about what the African expedition team needed to prepare. It would be great if Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz met the requirements, but the expedition currently lacks a military leader. Carlo is currently considering Garibaldi's eldest son Minotti. Now that the expedition team has made some progress, we naturally need to speed up the construction of our armed forces. Carlo decided to call Minotti and ask him if he would be willing to lead an expedition to Africa. Minotti was arranged to stay in the city of Madrid not far from the royal palace, and it took less than half an hour to get to the palace. Not long after he ordered the guards to call Minotti, Carlo saw him in his reception room. "Minotti, how do you feel about coming to Spain? Is it comparable to what you had in Italy before?" Carlo asked with a smile. "Majesty," Minotti replied very respectfully. He had followed his father Garibaldi around Europe and America since he was a child, so naturally he would not care about the small problem of moving from Italy to Spain. What's more, he was on Caprera Island before, and the living environment now is much better than Caprera. "That's good." Carlo smiled and nodded, stating his purpose. "Regarding your appointment, I have two considerations. The first option is to serve as the deputy commander of the guards and look for opportunities to rise after the guards expand. During this period, you can also go to the Spanish military academy to study and supplement your military knowledge. The second idea is that I have a dangerous job that I think you can do. Of course, if you complete this job, you will be a hero to the whole of Spain, and I will definitely not be stingy with the reward. The choice of which job to take is yours, and I hope you will consider it carefully." After hearing Carlo's words, Minotti blurted out without much hesitation, "Your Majesty, I choose the second job. Compared to staying in the guards, I prefer challenging work. It is indeed more comfortable to stay in the guards, and there is even time to go to the military academy for further studies. But the disadvantage is that the position will not change much in a short period of time, and there is a high probability that you will not participate in the war. What's more, the expansion of the guards has already been carried out once, and it will take a few years before they can expand again. This also means that, if Minotti chooses to serve as the deputy commander of the Royal Guard, he can only stay around the palace and do nothing, which is not in line with his personality. In the many wars fought with his father Garibaldi, Minotti showed an extremely bellicosity, and naturally did not want to stay in the guards, which was far away from the army. Haha, you have to think carefully. Although the second job has the opportunity to establish great merit, it is also extremely dangerous. If you choose the first job, I will not blame you, but if you choose the second job, I hope you are prepared to die in the mission." Carlo smiled and was very happy with Minotti's choice. But no matter how happy he was, Carlo didn't want Minotti to die on the way to explore Africa, because he had no preparation. Exploring the Congo Basin is bound to be full of dangers. If you are not prepared to die on the way, it is best not to embark on this journey. "It's okay, Your Majesty." Minotti shook his head with a fearless smile on his face, which war doesn't kill people. Danger is the driving force for my action. I'm confident that I can complete your mission, Your Majesty, no matter how dangerous it is. Carlo laughed, and laughed from the heart. Minotti and Giardia are two completely different styles. Jayati is more conservative and cautious in his actions, while Minotti, as his elder brother, is just the opposite, showing a fearless, bold and radical attitude. Both styles have their own advantages, but if he had to choose which one is more suitable for African expedition, Carlo would certainly choose Minotti's style. Anyway, as the captain of the expedition, Minotti was only responsible for military affairs. The overall goals and other actions of the expedition were the responsibility of the deputy captain, who had actual African exploration experience. Minotti's mission was more like that of a thug captain, so it was best to be more radical lead to problems. Great. Carlo nodded with satisfaction, and told him the details of the second mission. Do you know the Congo Basin? Carlo asked with a smile. The primeval forest in Central Africa? Your Majesty, your mission is not to explore this area, right? Minotti asked in surprise goals. Your task is to be the leader of the expedition, explore the Congo River Basin, and establish trade relations with local indigenous tribes. Once the Spanish flag is hoisted over most of this land, we will naturally have sovereignty over this land. I hope this operation can only succeed and not fail, because it is related to whether Spain can obtain this land, and whether it can have such a large colony. But, Your Majesty, I have no experience in African exploration. I suggest finding a suitable candidate to be the leader of the expedition, not me. Minotti hesitated, but still said, I can lead an armed team to follow the expedition, but if I lead the entire expedition, the probability of annihilation will be greater. Hahaha, don't worry, Minotti, I have already made preparations. Although you are the captain of the expedition, there is someone else in charge of the expedition. You only need to be responsible for the armed forces under your command. If the native African tribes you encounter are cooperative, that would naturally be the best thing. If those damned African natives are unwilling to cooperate with us, your mission is to send them to see God and let them know who is the master of this land. Carlo said with a smile. Minotti nodded in relief, and said to Carlo firmly, it's alright, Your Majesty. I will do my best to complete the expedition's mission and turn the entire Congo River Basin into Spanish territory. Your Majesty, when can the expedition set off? I can't wait to go to the interior of Africa. Looking at Minotti, who seemed a little impatient, after asking all the questions, Carlo said with a smile, we have to wait for a while. At least we have to determine the specific person in charge of the expedition team. Of course, you can also meet with the expedition leader in advance, and you will work together for the next few years. I allow you to select men from the guards and the Spanish army to form a small armed force. The strength of the armed force is related to the success of this expedition. You still have to spend some effort on selecting the team members. Compared to the ready-made African expedition team owned by Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz, the armed team that Minotti is to lead is currently the most problematic. Because at this time, except for Captain Minotti, the members of the armed team have not been determined. So how can they explore Africa? Anthony Ronaldo Prince Cruz did have a small armed force, but most of them were not well trained, so Carlo was not too reassured. Carlo only had 100% trust in the armed squad, composed of soldiers selected from the guards and the Spanish army. Although the Spanish army's combat effectiveness was not that strong, it was not bad in the overall European environment. Facing the indigenous tribes in the interior of Africa, the armed team drawn from the regular army could easily deal with them. As you command, Your Majesty. Minotti nodded that some of the team members will not have mental problems. Therefore, when selecting team members, priority should be given to those soldiers who are braver and more loyal to the country. Only in this way will they not choose to defect during the exploration of Africa, and a well-trained and loyal armed force can effectively face any accidents and dangers that occur during the exploration of Africa. It's the second 7th day with 10,000 views a day. 10,210,000 views have been updated today. Please support the 2-in-1 chapter. Chapter 86 Declare War on Morocco. Carlo was still waiting for the formation of an expedition team, trying to secretly explore the Congo River Basin, while the government was planning to colonize Morocco. But Carlo clearly underestimated the government's ambitions to colonize Morocco. After Serrano and Primo returned from the palace, they formulated an action plan for Morocco overnight, and determined the time of action. It was now September 21st, 1870, and Primo and Serrano had planned to carry out their action a week later, on September 28th. A week was just enough time to mobilize the troops and ensure that there were enough troops to carry out military operations against Morocco at the beginning of the operation. Ceuta is located at the northernmost tip of Morocco's territory, across the sea from Gibraltar. This is also the reason why the British do not want Spain to occupy too much territory near Ceuta. It was for this reason that Prime Minister Primo divided the operation against Morocco into two parts. The main force set out from Ceuta, heading south to Tetuan and west to Tangier, completely occupying the small northern corner of Morocco. There is also a protruding pointed tip in southern Spain, which together with the protruding pointed tip in northern Morocco form the gateway to the western Mediterranean. For this reason, the British are unlikely to agree to Spain's occupation of this place. Therefore, in Prime Minister Primo's plan, there will be an army that will expand northward along the coast from the Ifni fishing base previously occupied by Spain, to occupy the southern Moroccan city of Agadir. Even if the first plan failed due to British interference, as long as the second plan was completed and Agadir was occupied, it would not be a loss for the Spanish government. For European countries of that era, it was easy to find excuses to take action against indigenous African countries. Sometimes there is no need for an excuse at all, and colonial expansion is the best excuse. With the lesson learned from the last time, Prime Minister Primo decided to make secret preparations and give the Moroccan government a surprise attack. It would be best to achieve their strategic goals before the European powers reacted, so that they could take the initiative in the subsequent negotiations. On September 28, 1870, the Spanish army assembled in Ceuta and launched a fierce attack on the surrounding Moroccan indigenous tribes without any warning. 12 hours later, the Spanish government declared war on the Moroccan government, citing an attack planned by the Moroccans that killed at least 5 Spaniards in Ceuta. An hour before declaring war on the Moroccan government, Prime Minister Primo sent a telegram to Italian Prime Minister Giovanni, asking the Italian government to express its support for the Spanish government in this war. In return, the Spanish government would strongly support Italy's colonial operations in Tunisia and Libya, and the two sides would conclude a military alliance on North African colonization. The alliance between Spain and Italy was something that the two governments were constantly negotiating. Considering the relationship between Carlo and Emanuele, it was normal for the Spanish and Italian governments to gradually move closer under the influence of the two. Morocco, Italy wanted Tunisia and Libya, and between them was France's Algerian colony. With France as their neighbor and a powerful enemy, the relationship between Spain and Italy was actually very friendly. At least in some aspects, such as colonization, they could cooperate. However, compared with Primo, Prime Minister Giovanni did not have that much power. Although the Kingdom of Italy was also a constitutional monarchy, who could ignore the influence of King Emanuele II? After receiving the telegram from the Spanish government, Prime Minister Giovanni immediately asked to see King Vittorio Emanuele II, and asked about the king's attitude. "What do you think of this matter?" Vittorio Emanuele II did not give his own opinion, but asked Prime Minister Giovanni's thoughts. Although the royal families of the two countries are one family, it does not mean that their governments are one family. This matter concerns the interests of the Italian and Spanish governments, so naturally the royal family cannot have the final say. Victor Emanuele II certainly understood this. Although he was a good father, he was also a good king. If doing so would harm the interests of the Italian government, then Victor Emanuele II would have to carefully consider the relationship between the two governments. "Your Majesty, I think what Primo said makes sense." Prime Minister Giovanni thought seriously for a moment and replied, "Spain's colonial demands do not conflict with ours, and this will not harm Italy's interests. Secondly, France had colonial operations in Morocco and Tunisia, and could be seen as a common enemy of Spain and Italy in their colonization of Africa. If we rely on ourselves to fight against France, we are doomed to be defeated by the French. If we don't want to see France occupy a large area of North African territory from Morocco to Libya, the best choice is to cooperate with the Spanish." So the Prime Minister agrees to cooperate with the Spanish government? Vittorio Emanuele II asked with a smile. He could accept either cooperating with or not cooperating with the Spanish government, but if he could take the opportunity to help the Spanish government, Vittorio Emanuele II would naturally be willing to see it. The stronger Spain is, the more benefits Carlo will get. Without affecting the interests of Italy, Vittorio Emanuele II certainly hopes that his son can rule a more powerful country. Your Majesty, the last war between Spain and Morocco caused British intervention, and I'm afraid it will be the same this time. Spain's biggest enemy in colonizing Morocco is not France, but Britain, which is thousands of miles away from Spain. If it is just France, it is fine, but if Britain is included, I'm afraid our support will not be of much use. Prime Minister Giovanni mustered up the courage and expressed his guess. The British? Vittorio Emanuele II nodded, thinking that Prime Minister Giovanni's guess was still reasonable. Since becoming powerful, Britain has become a notorious troublemaker on the European continent. The British will intervene in any international events to ensure that the balance of power on the European continent will not be disrupted. If Spain's invasion of Morocco had been targeted by the British, it would have been unlikely to complete the colonization of Morocco despite British opposition. Vittorio Emanuele II sighed, looked at Prime Minister Giovanni who was waiting for his order, and ordered, give the Spanish government diplomatic support in accordance with our previous support. At the same time, tell the Spanish government that, if this colonial action causes intervention from other powers, Italy will be unable to intervene. It's the third day with 10,000 words a day. I have updated 2,000,000 words so far, and there are still 8,000 words to be updated. I beg for your support. Chapter 87. Please ask the British government. Long before the Spanish government declared war on Morocco, it had received a warning from the Italian government. The Italian government said it would provide diplomatic support to Spain and the military operation, but would not interfere if it attracted the attention of other powers. Primo naturally understood that the Italian government would not go against the British for Spain. It would be enough if they were willing to express their support for Spain and the military action against Morocco. At 4 p.m. on September 28, 1870, 2.5 hours had passed since Spain declared war on the Moroccan government, and 14.5 hours had passed since the Spanish army officially took action. Faced with the sudden attack of the Spanish army, the indigenous tribes of Morocco were not prepared at all and were defeated, even though they had no helmets or armor. Morocco is a very special country in Africa. Most of the population of Morocco are Arabs and Berbers, belonging to the European and Mediterranean races, that is, Caucasians. However, unlike the white countries in Europe, Morocco is an Arab country and believes in Islam. As the most special African country, Morocco is obviously different from the natives of Africa. They are more like the natives of the Middle East. But indigenous people are indigenous people after all, and Morocco is undoubtedly far behind Spain. Moreover, Morocco is not a monolithic entity. There are many tribes in Morocco, and not all of them support the Moroccan Sultanate under the rule of the Alauite dynasty. Another reason why Morocco is more suitable for localization is precisely because of the white population in Morocco. Carlo does not consider himself a racist, but Carlo's hatred for black people comes from the heart. However, such an idea was not surprising in Europe at that time. Although the abolitionist movement in various countries was in full swing, no white person would ever sincerely recognize the human rights of black people. In the minds of white people, black people should be slaves on plantations. What does human rights have to do with them? Are they human beings? In Africa have never treated the local indigenous people as human beings. The cumulative number of black people massacred by European countries is at least in the 8 digits. Of course, this is mainly because the countries have not explored Africa deeply enough. When Africa is basically divided up by various countries, the number of African natives who die as a result will increase. Morocco is a white country, and bringing it under Spanish rule will not turn Spain into a black country. The Moroccan Sultan was an old acquaintance. Mohammed IV had been the Sultan since 1859. He had just come to power when he faced the war between Spain and Morocco and suffered the bitter consequences of defeat. After this defeat, Mohammed IV decided to reform Morocco, introduce powerful European industries, and improve Morocco's military strength to deal with the colonial invasion of European powers. but Mohammed IV overestimated the Moroccans' acceptance of advanced industrial technology when he went to great lengths to get the British to bring the steam engine to the royal palace in Marrakech. He found that the ministers were frightened by such a huge machine that they had never seen before and dared not even get close to it. Even if Mohammed IV ordered the printing of a large number of Bibles about promoting steam engines, it could not arouse the curiosity of the Moroccans. Ultimately, the reforms came to nothing, and Morocco never industrialized. Seeing the failure of industrialization, Mohammed IV came up with another good idea, which was to strengthen Morocco's military power. He formed a new army, the Askanese army, and spent a great deal of money to equip the new army with muskets and provide them with Western-style training. Upon learning that the Spanish were invading from northern Morocco, Muhammad was furious and ordered the newly formed army of Askanese army to march north to resist the invasion of the Spanish army. The Moroccan Sultan, who was born in 1802, had great confidence in his newly formed army. Even at a meeting of the Moroccan Sultanate's government that day, Mohammed IV confidently stated, "My army will easily defeat the Spanish army." The days when Morocco was invaded by European countries are gone forever. But soon, reality gave the old Sultan a heavy blow. Not long after sending out their new army, intelligence came from the south that the Spanish army was marching northward from Sidi Ifni and was heading towards Agadir, a major city in southern Morocco. This left Mehmed IV dumbfounded. His new army was not large in number and was obviously unable to deal with the Spanish troops from both the north and south at the same time. But if the Spanish army was allowed to attack Agadir, it seemed that Marrakech would also be in danger. Mohammed IV's confidence in the new army was extinguished in an instant, and he was full of frustration. His already old face looked even older. Damn it, is Morocco destined to be colonized? Mohammed IV looked up at the sky, full of despair about Morocco's situation. At this time, Moroccan ministers gave their opinions one after another. The most common opinion is that we should go to the West as soon as possible. No, go to Western Europe to ask the British government for help. The last war between Spain and Morocco was due to the intervention of the British government, which allowed Morocco to retain most of its territory. Otherwise, considering Morocco's turbulent domestic situation and poor military strength at the time, it would have been a plaything at the mercy of Spain. The Moroccan government at the moment really has no better solution. Apart from asking the British government to intervene, there seems to be no other effective solution. As for fighting a war with the Spanish, the Moroccan ministers had never thought about it. 10 years ago, I did have such an idea, but I was beaten by the Spanish, and couldn't tell east from west and south from north. The domestic situation in Spain at that time was not much better. It was all about the gap in weapons and equipment and comprehensive strength. Although Morocco has now formed a new army, the number of troops is only about 20,000. Moreover, the Moroccan ministers themselves are well aware of the situation of the new army. With the support of the Moroccan army in Morocco, its combat effectiveness is still quite strong. But if compared with European countries, it is completely disproportionate. Moroccans are not very receptive to advanced weapons and technology. In addition, Morocco's weapons and equipment are all purchased from European countries. It is naturally impossible to allow the soldiers of the new army to conduct long-term target practice training. Shooting training sessions organized has not exceeded 10 times in total, and each person is only given 3 bullets in each target shooting training, which basically has no effect. It is more reliable to expect such new troops to stop the attack of the Spanish army than to expect the British to be merciful and save their lives. It's the 3rd/7th day of daily 10,000 views 4,10ths,000 words have been updated. Please support. The remaining 6,000 words may be published after 12 o'clock, but before 2 o'clock. Chapter 88, a headache-inducing meeting. Whether the Moroccan government will ask the British government for help is a question that the Spanish government has long considered. Considering the last Spanish-Moroccan war, this is 100% certain to happen. It's just a matter of time. However, it took some time for the British government to receive the news and contact the Spanish government for mediation. What Primo had to do was to achieve as much military success as possible during this period and use this as an excuse to demand more land and compensation from Morocco. As long as Spain gains a considerable advantage in this war, even the British will not be able to let Spain return empty-handed. The one who led the Spanish army to fight against Morocco was none other than the current Minister of Defense, Archduke Serrano. Knowing that the attack on Morocco was a war that could not fail, Carlo also directly stuffed Andrew and Carmen into the war in an effort to get some credit. Andrew and Carmen are both capable enough, but what they lack at present is the experience and qualifications to command an army. Spain had few opportunities to participate in wars, so Carlo naturally could not miss this large-scale war that mobilized tens of thousands of troops. Fortunately, the suppression of the Cuban rebellion had already proved the abilities of the two men, and Serrano admired their military talents. He agreed without hesitation to Carlo's proposal to put the two men into the army fighting against Morocco. Speaking of which, Andrew and Carmen's status is actually not low. In terms of title, they are newly crowned barons. Although such a baron title is more of an honorary nature, it is also a hereditary noble title recognized by the Kingdom of Spain, which is definitely an improvement in status compared to commoners in terms of military rank. Both were promoted to the rank of major, although each of them only commanded a battalion of troops, considering the small size of the Spanish army as a whole. The battalion commander was already considered a middle to high level official. Considering that both of them are in their early 20s, they are definitely two of the most promising new stars in the Spanish military hierarchy. After the war with Morocco ended, Carlo did not plan to make an exception and promote them. It was time for them to settle down in the army and accumulate experience before climbing up. On the morning of September 29, 1870, in the Royal Palace of Madrid, Carlo saw Prime Minister Primo walking into the office with a smile on his face, and he knew that the Spanish army was doing quite well in Morocco. "How is the war going? Any good news?" Carlo asked. "Your Majesty, our army has already reached Hassan and Wadi Rau in the south of Tetuan, and the army is heading towards Tangier and Alaish in two directions. If nothing goes wrong, the Jaguar should arrive tomorrow or the day after tomorrow." Prime Minister Primo was in high spirits, and the results achieved by the Spanish army seemed to make him several years younger. "How is the war situation on the southern front? Can we achieve the planned strategic goals before the British intervene in the war?" Carlo asked. The Spanish government has made preparations for both scenarios. Even if the occupied land in the north is returned to the Moroccan government, the coastline occupied in the south is enough for Spain to make up for the loss. If we add the compensation from the Moroccan government and the series of treaties signed, Spain's colonial operation was definitely profitable. The offensive on the southern front is also going smoothly. We have already conquered Maglev and Terraint. Primo's words were full of sarcasm towards the Moroccans. A smile. When our army arrived in Maglev, the Moroccans were still sleeping. Their army is vulnerable to ours. If all goes well, our army should be able to attack Agadir within 3 days. At this time, the overall strength of African countries and European countries was far behind, which also made Europeans generally look down on Africans. Of course, in addition to the difference in strength, the difference in skin color is also the reason why Europeans look down on Africans. Although Morocco is a white country, due to its geographical location and religious beliefs, it is also regarded as an indigenous African and the target of colonization by European countries. After hearing Primo's report, Carlo nodded and was quite satisfied with the progress of the war. The war against Morocco now is not a loss at all, which is why Carlo did not stop the war. Even if Spain could not gain much land, the compensation from the Moroccans would be enough for Spain to offset the cost of the war and still have some funds left for domestic industrial construction. From this perspective, Morocco is more like a large blood bag. When the Spanish runs out of money, it can come here to suck some blood. Anyway, no one cares about the lives of Moroccans. 4 hours after the Spanish army declared war on the Moroccan government, the British government finally received the news. The British Prime Minister at that time was William Ewart Gladstone, who was later hailed as one of the greatest prime ministers in British history. However, Prime Minister Gladstone had only been in office for 2 years at this time, and some of the government reforms and laws he promoted had not yet achieved the corresponding results. He was just one of the many ordinary politicians who ascended to the Prime Minister's throne. However, the British Prime Minister at this time has an advantage compared to other European countries. That is, the Prime Minister himself has considerable power and is a true head of state. Although Queen Victoria is still there, she rarely appears in public after the death of her husband Prince Albert. This is actually a good thing for the British government. A queen who does not interfere much in political affairs is the kind of ruler all prime ministers want. Point upon learning of Spain's invasion of Morocco, British Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone immediately convened a cabinet meeting to discuss a solution to the Moroccan War. In fact, it was not a matter of negotiation, because for the British there was only one solution, which was to force Spain not to demand land near Tetuan from Morocco and to prevent the expansion of Spanish power in northern Morocco. But the Spanish government now is somewhat different from the Spanish government 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the Spanish government had few allies and the domestic situation was quite chaotic, so it was naturally unable to withstand the pressure from the British government. The current Spanish government has solved its domestic problems. The Spanish royal family and the Italian royal family are from the same family, which makes it possible for Spain and Italy to unite. Moreover, the Germans had just defeated the French not long ago, making the situation in this area even more chaotic than it was 10 years ago. Gentlemen, tell me what you think. How should we deal with the war between Spain and Morocco, and how can we prevent the Spanish from having a larger sphere of influence across Gibraltar? Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone was the first to ask. Mr. Prime Minister, I don't think we should back down on the possible threat to Gibraltar. The British Colonial Secretary took the lead and put forward his opinion. Gibraltar is related to our control of the Mediterranean, and we must never let Gibraltar return to the arms of Spain. No, sir, this may make the situation in the Western Mediterranean worse. Foreign Secretary Granville George Leveson Gower also stood up and put forward his own completely different opinion. The defeat of the French, the unification of Italy and the reforms of Spain are all affecting the situation in the Western Mediterranean, and we must also consider the balance of the Western Mediterranean as a whole. If we continue to suppress Spain, will it deepen the hatred between us and Spain? Of course, a small Spain naturally cannot affect us. What if Spain chooses to join the arms of Germany? Gentlemen, when the Germans form an alliance with Italy and Spain, who will have the final say in the situation in the Western Mediterranean? Don't forget that we are still facing the challenge of the Russians in Central Asia. It is not a good thing to suppress the Spaniards blindly. It may make the situation we face worse. Lord George, do you mean that we should allow Spain to colonize Morocco? Oh my god, how can you have such a crazy idea? Gibraltar? Damn it, if Gibraltar is reoccupied by the Spanish, we will completely lose control of the Mediterranean. The Colonial Secretary once again raised his objections, revealing his radical attitude. No, sir, we certainly can't do nothing. Foreign Secretary Granville George Leveson Gower explained with a smile, since Spain wants colonies, let them take them. Isn't there a large area of land in southern Morocco? Let them take it. We have only one request, that the Spanish should not claim the land in northern Morocco. If the Spanish are unwilling to give up the land in northern Morocco, it proves that they still have the idea of regaining Gibraltar, which means that the Spanish are destined to be our enemies. Nodded and said with some satisfaction, in that case, the matter of contacting the Spanish government will be left to you, Minister George. If the Spanish are sensible, that would be great, but if they are unwilling to give up the land in northern Morocco, we can only send our royal fleet to the Mediterranean. The British Empire was the most powerful country in the world at that time, and it also had the most powerful fleet in the world. This was why all British officials, including Prime Minister William Ewart Gladstone, had great confidence. Not to mention a small country like Spain. Even the navies of Spain and Italy combined are no match for the royal fleet. In terms of navy, the British at that time really had no rivals and could look down on all countries in the world. Minister Granville George Leveson Gower nodded and took on the task assigned by the Prime Minister. For a skilled diplomat like him, threatening a non-power country like Spain was easy. On the afternoon of September 29, 1870, the British ambassador to Spain asked to see Primo and put forward the demands of the British government war, but an armed action to punish the murderers. As you know, the Moroccan rebellion accidentally killed our civilians in Ceuta, but the Moroccan government is unwilling to hand over the murderers. After we punish all the murderers who hurt Spanish citizens, our army will naturally withdraw more casualties. How about we sit down together and negotiate a peace treaty? I want to pledge the British government's neutrality to ensure a fair peace agreement is reached between you and the Moroccan government. Prime Minister Primo still kept smiling on the surface, but in his heart he was quite dissatisfied with the British ambassador. Spain has already gained an advantage in this war and invested a lot of manpower and material resources. Why should we stop the war just because of your British government's words after such a costly war? Do you really think you are God? I'm sorry, Mr. Ambassador. Primo shook his head, and the smile on his face gradually cooled. There is still fighting on the front line. If we stop the war, Ashley, it will cause great damage to our army. How about waiting for another half a month? After we have counted our weapons and equipment and the frontline troops have reached a practical ceasefire, we can discuss the specific peace agreement. British Ambassador William also shook his head. He was not stupid. If the Spanish were given half a month, they would have reached the capital of Morocco long ago. It would be even more difficult to cease fire at that time. At least the Spaniards would gain more land, which was not in line with the expectations of the British government. In the mind of the British government, the sooner the war is stopped, the better. It would be best to exchange a small part of the land in southern Morocco for the end of the war, which would not allow Spain to gain too much benefit and avoid the danger that Gibraltar might face. Contacted the Moroccan government, and they can stop the war at any time. Your Excellency, the Prime Minister, our government is very sincere in negotiating with your country, and we hope that your country can also show due sincerity. British Ambassador William said with dissatisfaction. Ambassador William, if your so-called sincerity is to ask Spain to stop the war, then please go back. Primo, who came from the military, is not a weak person. Otherwise he would not have risked offending multiple forces to promote reforms for Prime Minister Primo. The British threat was not that serious, because it was impossible for the British to really interfere in this war, and it was nothing more than a diplomatic threat. Prime Minister Primo is not afraid, even if the British really want to interfere in this war, because the British have many problems of their own. If Britain really wants to fight with Spain, there will definitely be more than one country behind the scenes to trip Britain up. Although Spain cannot leave its homeland, it is not easy for the British to invade Spain and defeat it. Seeing Primo's tough attitude, Ambassador William had to change his attitude. Prime Minister Primo, our country does not want this war to end peacefully. Taking into account your country's contribution in this war, we are willing for your country to occupy a part of the land in the south of Morocco as compensation. In addition, how about the Moroccan government paying your country another compensation? I know that your country is undergoing reform and industrialization. This reparation will help your country expand its industry faster. It can be regarded as compensation for the casualties of Spanish civilians by Morocco. Seeing that the British had finally changed their attitude, Prime Minister Primo nodded with satisfaction and resumed negotiations with the British. Our troops can withdraw from Hassan and Wadi Rau, but I hope we can obtain the triangle area between Ceuta, Tangier and Tetuan. In addition, we also hope to acquire the coastline between Agadir and Sidi Ifni, where we will build a fishing base to increase the income of fishermen and compensate the civilian primes who were killed and injured in this conflict. Hearing Minister Primo's request, Ambassador William stood up and said repeatedly, "No, Prime Minister Primo, this is impossible. Our government will only accept your country occupying the coastline between Agadir and Sidi Ifni. Other lands are simply out of the question point. If your country is willing, we can remind the Moroccan government to increase its share of the compensation and satisfy your country financially." After hearing what Ambassador William said, Prime Minister Primo finally understood the bottom line of the British, which is also good news. Moreover, they are willing to let the Moroccan government increase its share of compensation, which is also what Prime Minister Primo values very much. After all, expanding colonies is also for profit, and if you can get money directly, that would be even better. Ambassador William, our country has paid too much for the war with Morocco. We can accept giving up our claims to northern Moroccan lands and restoring Morocco's northern border to its pre-war state. But we want to occupy all Moroccan land south of Agadir, and the Moroccan government should pay our government at least 500 million pesetas in compensation. Prime Minister Primo pretended to think, and after a moment of contemplation, he spoke. 500 million pesetas. Prime Minister Primo, why don't you just drop them? This is too much, and it is not an amount that the Moroccan government can afford. Most they can accept is 20 million pesetas in compensation. Ambassador William said to Primo in a somewhat disastrous and inappropriate manner, 500 million pesetas is not a small amount. Peseta is worth about the same as franc, and this amount is equivalent to 500 million francs, 1/10 of the compensation paid by the French to Germany during the Franco-German War. The French have only paid 5 billion francs in compensation. How can you, Primo, be so confident that the Moroccan government can pay 500 million francs? Ambassador William looked at Primo with disbelief in his eyes. Isn't this clearly blackmail? Robbery? Prime Minister Primo smiled inwardly and answered secretly, isn't this robbery? However, it was obviously inappropriate to say such things. Prime Minister Primo pretended to be in pain and said helplessly, then reduce it to 300 million pesetas. Ambassador William, you don't know that we have already spent at least 200 million pesetas on this war. Adding the casualties between civilians and the army, I think 300 million pesetas is a very reasonable reparation. Ambassador William almost sneered. This war cost 200 million pesetas? I'm afraid it's less than 1/10 of that. The war had only lasted a few days, and the Spanish army had only 2 weapons, rifles, and artillery. Currently, the firing rates of rifles and artillery are relatively slow. In addition, the Moroccan army is poorly equipped and does not need to conduct fire suppression. Under such circumstances, how much weapons and ammunition can the Spanish army consume? According to reasonable estimates, the Spanish government spent less than 10 million pesetas in this war that lasted only a few days. Now they turned around and asked for 300 million pesetas in compensation. Wasn't it treating the British government as a fool? Prime Minister Primo, the proportion of the compensation can be discussed in detail during the peace talks. Ambassador William reminded, on behalf of the British government, I agree with your claim for the southern Moroccan land, and agree that the Moroccan government should pay compensation to your country. So, is your government willing to cease fire and negotiate peace with Morocco? Prime Minister Primo nodded. The smile on his face could no longer be hidden. Of course, Ambassador William. To be honest, the Spanish government does not want to see war, and we also yearn for the arrival of peace. Long as the Moroccan government can agree to our 2 demands, we are ready to cease fire at any time, and on behalf of the Spanish government, I guarantee that the Spanish army will never set foot on Moroccan territory again. Ambassador William finally breathed a sigh of relief after getting Primo's nod of agreement. This meeting made him feel more physically and mentally exhausted than the battle with the Toledos last night. Fortunately, the final result was satisfactory. The Spaniards were willing to give up their territorial demands in northern Morocco, which was the most important thing for the British government. As for the reparations that the Moroccan government paid to Spain, is it important? Not at all. The British don't care whether the Moroccan government can afford the compensation. The third update of 6,000 words. Please support. The day's work has been completed, and we will continue tomorrow. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 89, The British Response. The colonial war launched by the Spanish government ended like this. Long before the war broke out, Prime Minister Primo had considered what the purpose of this war was, that is, what Spain wanted to gain from this war. Since the British government has agreed to Spain's occupation of the coastline near Agadir in southern Morocco, and agreed to the Moroccan government's compensation to the Spanish government, the war can naturally be ended. Unfortunately, this kind of thing is destined to never happen again. Otherwise, if it were to happen once a year, the Spanish government would have the funds it needed for industrial development. On October 2, 1870, witnessed by the British ambassador, the Spanish and Moroccan governments held peace talks in Ceuta to end the war. Unlike the brief meeting between British Ambassador William and Prime Minister Primo, this peace talk concerns the interests between Spain and Morocco, and is bound to involve some wrangling. The duration of the peace talks can be as short as a few days, as long as more than 10 days or even a month. Only when a peace agreement acceptable to both sides is determined can the peace talks be truly concluded. After reaching a compromise with British Ambassador William, Prime Minister Primo reported to Carlo and informed him of the peace talks and the impending end of the war. Carlo still felt a little regretful. The war had only been going on for a few days, and Carmen and Andrew had just gone to the battlefield too. Peace talks in Ceuta officially began. Spain's diplomatic representatives put forward Spain's two demands at the beginning. One was land and the other was funds. The Spanish government demanded that all Moroccan areas south of the line from Agadir to Tata belong to the Spanish government as compensation from the Moroccan government to the Spanish government and civilians. Secondly, the Moroccan government must pay the Spanish government 350 million pesetas in compensation, of which 200 million pesetas are the costs of the Spanish military operation, which should be borne by the Moroccan government. The remaining 150 million pesetas were used as compensation for Spanish civilians and soldiers killed and wounded in the war, as well as to cover the cost of the Spanish army's withdrawal from Moroccan territory. There is an additional requirement, which is that the Moroccan government establishes a demilitarized zone in the triangle of Tangier, Tetuan and Ceuta, and Moroccan troops are not allowed to enter, to prevent similar conflicts from happening again. Now the representatives of the Moroccan government were completely unable to sit still. The three conditions are more outrageous than the other, and are simply putting the Moroccan government representatives on the spot. Although Agadir is known as the largest city in southern Morocco, its geographical location is more towards the central part. There is a lot of land south of the line from Agadir to Tata, which is close to 1/6 of Morocco's territory. Although the population here is not large compared to the northern region, the Moroccan government absolutely cannot agree to nearly 1/6 of the land all at once. The second is the compensation of 350 million pesetas. This amount of compensation is an astronomical figure for the Moroccan government, and it is impossible to come up with it, even if they sell everything they have. In addition to the demilitarized zone required by the last condition, the Moroccan government did not become a colony of Spain. But what is the difference between this and becoming a colony of Spain? No, this is simply impossible. The representative of the Moroccan government stood up in surprise, looked at the representative of the Spanish government with anger, and directly refused. "We can't agree to such a request. Never. That's easy." The representative of the Spanish government smiled and nodded, not caring about the representative of the Moroccan government at all. "Then let the war continue, and let the outcome of the war speak for itself." Defeat. Upon hearing the threat from Spain, "You two, since you have come here together, it proves that you all have the willingness to negotiate. I propose that both sides take a step back and strive to reach a peace agreement that is acceptable to both sides. Considering the specific economic situation of the Moroccan government, I think the compensation of 350 million pesetas is unreasonable and an unbearable burden for the Moroccan government." British Ambassador William stood up and tried to get the peace talks back on track. "How about this? Today's negotiations end here. You two sides each draft a more reasonable peace negotiation demand, and we will discuss it tomorrow." The first day of peace talks ended without any progress. The Spanish representative still looked very relaxed. Morocco was now like a lamb to be slaughtered, and it was impossible for it to do so without paying a heavy price. This is also the characteristic of this era. Underdeveloped countries must be prepared to be invaded and robbed by more powerful countries at any time. The saying that those who lag behind will be beaten is very reasonable. The law of the jungle is the only truth in this era. On the Moroccan side, after the first day of negotiations, the Moroccan representative immediately approached British Ambassador William to seek help from the British ambassador. "Dear British Ambassador, Spain's request is totally unacceptable to Morocco. We ask for the help of the powerful British government, and we are willing to pay the corresponding price." The Moroccan ambassador said to William straight to the point, "Sir, I sympathize with your government's experience." British Ambassador William first looked helpless and said to the Moroccan government representative with great regret, "But you know, even if the British Empire is extremely powerful, it cannot interfere with the decisions of other countries at will. Asking Spain to give up its claim to northern Morocco is the most we can do for your country. The Spanish will never give up the idea of colonizing Morocco, and we are deeply sorry for that." Although the British government could accept Spain's annexation of the land of southern Morocco, it did not mean that the British would not cause trouble for Spain. The British government had long planned to use this incident to incite the Moroccans to more intense resistance against Spain. Could gain a large colony through this war, they would be exhausted from suppressing the Moroccans' resistance for a long time, and the cost might even be greater than the benefits. The Spanish were busy suppressing the rebellion in Morocco, so naturally they had no time to think about the British Gibraltar long time, eventually making the country weaker and weaker, and completely turning it into a country that could not pose any threat to Britain. I'm not feeling well today, so I will take a day off and update once. I will continue to update 10,000 times tomorrow. Chapter 90 Big Harvest. Entire peace talks lasted for several days, and finally, under the witness of the British, the Spanish government and the Moroccan government jointly signed a new peace agreement, the Treaty of Ceuta. In addition to this peace agreement, the two governments also agreed not to provoke disputes between the two sides for any reason in the next 10 years, and all conflicts should be resolved by the neutral country and witness country Britain. Naturally, the Spanish government has no objection to this request. First of all, the British government is not a fool. If Spain uses Morocco to blackmail them every once in a while, it is impossible for the British to give in every time. Secondly, the Spanish government has already obtained almost everything it wanted in this peace agreement on October 9, 1870, Prime Minister Primo found Carlo with a smile on his face to report on the progress of the peace talks. Your Majesty, our goal has been achieved. Prime Minister Primo had a very relaxed smile on his face, and he seemed very satisfied with the results of the peace talks. How is the situation? Did the British finally give in? Carlo asked with interest. Real decision. Without the intervention of the British government, the war would have ended with a total defeat and unconditional surrender of the Moroccan government. The British are willing to give up a little in terms of land in exchange for our concessions on compensation. Prime Minister Primo smiled and said, "It's a pity that the demilitarized zone we proposed was not passed, otherwise we could have influenced the northern part of Morocco through economic means." Carlo nodded, in a very good mood. "Tell me, what did the Moroccans pay in this war?" "The British agreed to our territorial claims west of the line from Agadir to Tata, as well as our colonial privileges in the Western Sahara region. We will establish the South Morocco colony in southern Morocco, and bring all of this land under our colonial rule," Prime Minister Primo replied. Carlo nodded, quite satisfied with the result. More importantly, the colonial governors of Spain were appointed also by the king, and adding a new colony was equivalent to strengthening the king's power. Does the government have any suggestions for the new colonial governor? Carlo suddenly asked. Prime Minister Primo was stunned, not quite sure what his king meant. "I have not been in Spain for long, and I have not had long-term contact with Spanish nobles. Prime Minister Primo, as a native of Spain, do you have any good candidates for governor to recommend to me?" Carlo said to Prime Minister Primo with a smile, changing the way he said it. Carlo had no interest in the new colonial governor for the time being, for no other reason than that he did not have anyone he trusted. The colonial governor had considerable power. In addition to being responsible to the king, he also had the military command and administrative supervision of the colony. The new colony must be stationed with troops. Controlling the selection of the colonial governor is equivalent to controlling the colonial army. It is precisely because Carlo did not have a good candidate at the time that Carlo decided to exchange the position of the colonial governor with Prime Minister Primo for benefits. At least Carlo still trusts Prime Minister Primo's future power. There is not much conflict between the two sides. Prime Minister Primo was of course well aware that the colonial governor was appointed directly by the king. The fact that Carlo could ask him so directly either meant that he trusted him to the utmost, or that he wanted to reach a certain exchange of interests with him. For Prime Minister Primo, he believed more in the second point, that is, Carlo wanted to use the position of colonial governor in exchange for some other benefits. But what kind of benefits did Carlo want in exchange? Primo was a little skeptically. "Let's continue to talk about our achievements in this operation. How much compensation can we get?" Carlo asked with a smile. Hearing Carlo change the subject, Prime Minister Primo quickly replied, a total of 75 million pesetas in compensation. Your Majesty, of the compensation 75 million pesetas is worth about 2.88 million pounds, which is a boost to Spain's current reform and development. If low interest loans from Italy are added, Spain will have no shortage of funds for its development in the next few years. Moreover, the 75 million pesetas were obtained for free. Spain spent less than 1 million pesetas in the war against Morocco. With this money, can we put our industrial construction on the agenda? Carlo asked, remembering the new industrial zone that had been suspended due to lack of funds. Of course, Your Majesty. Prime Minister Primo smiled again and had great hopes for the success of Spain's reforms, and the smooth development of industry. Illiterate rate has dropped from over 70% to below 55%. It seems to be only a reduction of 15%. However, for Spain, which has a total population of more than 16 million, at least 2.5 million illiterate people must have a cultural level above primary school. Although a large-scale literacy campaign has begun, the task of reducing the illiterate population by more than 2 million in less than 5 years is still arduous. After all, the Spanish government has focused most of its energy on reform and industrial development. Although education has also received attention, the overall funding is not much. I will work hard, Your Majesty. Prime Minister Primo nodded. He certainly knows the importance of education to national development, but the problem is that education in Spain is not so easy to carry out now. The literacy campaign must be carried out under the condition of increasing national income, so that more Spaniards will be willing to receive education. If ordinary Spaniards can't even get enough food, who will be in the mood to receive education? This also means that, if we want to significantly reduce the illiteracy rate, we must effectively increase the average annual income per capita, which cannot be solved by simply investing money in education. It's the 4th day of daily 10,000 views, and 2,000,000 views have been updated. Please support. Chapter 91 Generators and Motors. It turns out that good things always come in pairs. Not long after the signing of the Treaty of Ceuta, Carlo received another piece of good news. After several months of hard work, Graham's electrical laboratory produced an AC generator and a DC generator. Carlo was not at all surprised at the speed with which the electrical power laboratory was producing the generators. When he was in France before, Graham had manufactured 2 types of generators and was already quite familiar with the principles and specific manufacturing processes of generators. Although we came to Spain, we received great help from Carlo and some colleagues who had worked in France before. The manufacturing generators will not slow down, but will be accelerated. After all, the earliest generators were not very sophisticated, not to mention that they were small generators used for experiments. It was not difficult for Graham to make such a generator. Carlo was very excited when he learned that the speed of the generator had been successfully manufactured. All things are difficult at the beginning. Only after the development of the generator did Spain's electrification journey truly begin. With a generator, there is electricity. For Carlo, it is not difficult to use this new energy source. To a certain extent, the principles of generators and motors are similar, except that one converts kinetic energy into electrical energy, and the other converts electrical energy into kinetic energy. Later generations, that the material ultimately used in light bulbs was tungsten filament. Although current technology may not be able to produce qualified tungsten filaments for use in light bulbs, what does this have to do with Carlo? Carlo's task was to propose a tungsten filament light bulb as a concept to the experts involved in the research and development of light bulbs. As for how to make tungsten filament and experiment with tungsten filament light bulbs, that is something scientists should consider, and has nothing to do with King Carlo. Considering the importance of electricity to the future, Carlo, who had nothing to do, decided to go to the electric power laboratory in person to see how the research in the laboratory was going. Fortunately, the power laboratory is not far from the Royal Palace of Madrid. Carlo quickly arrived at the power laboratory in the suburbs, sitting in the royal carriage and enjoying the attentive service of the maid. It is indeed much more spectacular than before. Carlo saw the entire newly built experimental area while sitting in the carriage. It was much more complete than the last time he visited. Whether it is the power laboratory's power experiment building, or the engine research laboratory of the engine company, they are all built in a very professional manner. Because it is a new building, it looks quite impressive laboratory. In order not to disturb Graham and others' electricity experiments, Carlo deliberately did not inform the electricity laboratory of his arrival, which also resulted in no one greeting him from the direction of the electricity laboratory. But Carlo didn't mind such empty formalities. If the power laboratory had research results, that would be something Carlo should be happy about, and that was also the reason why Carlo founded the power laboratory. Because he had visited the experimental area before, Carlo was familiar with the location of the power laboratory. After instructing the troops stationed outside the experimental area to continue patrolling without making any noise, Carlo went to the electrical laboratory. The electrical laboratory was quite lively at this time. After the two generators were manufactured, Graham and many of his colleagues began to discuss the use of electrical energy. It is indeed possible to generate electricity using a generator, but the question is how to use the electricity. Explorations are in their initial stages, and it is difficult for electricity to prove its effectiveness, which is why electricity practitioners have not received much attention so far. Even if we can make a generator and generate electricity, the problem is that the current electricity is completely useless. It is possible to store the generated electricity using lead-acid batteries, but what is the use of that? Electricity is useless if it is not used well. After having several guards waiting outside the laboratory, Carlo opened the door and heard a heated discussion in the laboratory. Others in the lab also heard the door open and Carlo's voice. They looked up and found that Carlo had entered the lab. "Your Majesty." Everyone stopped discussing and saluted Carlo. There is no way. Carlo is now the big sponsor of the electric power laboratory. Graham also stood up appropriately and expressed his apology to Carlo. "I didn't receive any notice from the palace, so I didn't go to greet you." "It's okay, Mr. Graham. I ordered it. Your experiment is more important." Carlo smiled and nodded, not caring about these empty formalities. "I heard that both generators have been successfully manufactured." Carlo looked into the laboratory with some curiosity, looking for the generator. "Yes, Your Majesty," Graham explained quickly. "We have manufactured DC generators and AC generators, and are currently exploring the use of electricity. Your Majesty, please look. These are the two generators we used for the experiment, and they have been tested and can generate electricity." Carlo looked at the two small leak detection devices, not disgusted, but curious and satisfied. "Are there any devices that can store electricity now?" "There are lead-acid batteries, Your Majesty, working. We still have a certain amount of electricity to use for experiments." Lead-acid batteries were invented in 1859 by French physicist Gaston Plant. They were originally related to electricity, and Graham and others had worked for the French power company, so it was natural that they had come into contact with lead-acid batteries. After all, this is the only rechargeable battery in the world. It is more advanced than the earlier voltaic pile and Daniel battery, and is more suitable for various research in the power laboratory. "What stage are we at now? Are there any difficulties at present?" Carlo asked immediately. Although Carlo's knowledge of electricity was not extensive, the little knowledge he had was still quite useful in 1870, more than 150 years ago. A tungsten filament light bulb alone is enough to save Spain several years of detours in lighting. After all, current research on light bulbs basically tend to be carbon filament light bulbs. Electricity slowly began to develop later, and there was a war between Edison and Tesla over direct current and alternating current. In fact, direct current and alternating current have their own advantages and disadvantages, and the two are used in different scenarios. Even in later times, although people mostly use alternating current in their daily lives, direct current is also widely used in industry. It's a pity that Tesla is still too young, otherwise Carlo really plans to bring Tesla to Spain to work in the power industry. Just give Tesla a few years to grow up without interfering too much in his development. When Tesla becomes an adult and starts looking for a job in the future, it won't be too late for Carlo to send someone to bring Tesla to Spain. Tesla's ability was quite impressive. He obtained about 1,000 invention patents in his lifetime, and his research fields included alternating current, radio, wireless power transmission, ball lightning, turbines, amplified transmitters, particle beam weapons, solar engines, X-ray equipment, electric energy meters, missile science and remote sensing technology, aircraft, cosmic rays, radar systems, and robots, which seem to be diverse. For ordinary scientists, specializing in one of them requires most of their energy, and it also requires a bit of luck to discover some famous research results. As for Tesla, he has made contributions in almost all of these fields, and in some areas he has made quite outstanding contributions, which is commendable. However, he was a bit too obsessed with scientific research, and was eventually labeled a mad scientist. He also gave up the patent for alternating current, which led to him becoming poor and destitute, becoming one of the famous representatives of outstanding scientific research contributions, but poor and miserable. If Tesla does not give up its ACK patent, on average, the company will have to pay Tesla about $2.50 in patent fees for every horsepower of ACK electricity generated. This is an extremely exaggerated income, but for a person of ordinary status like Tesla, whether he can get this patent fee is also a problem. We have conducted experiments on power generation and storage, but there are still many problems with the use of electric energy. Graham reported truthfully. When reporting, Graham looked a little awkward, and he was obviously annoyed that Carlo had given him great, but support he had not achieved much research results. Speaking of which, I also have some ideas about the use of electrical energy. Carlo smiled and said, Mr. Graham, have you ever thought about using the principle of the generator in reverse? Graham was stunned for a moment. His mind was obviously stunned, but he continued to speak. Your Majesty, what are you saying? Carlo nodded and explained with a smile, since electrical energy can be generated from kinetic energy, why not try to generate kinetic energy from electrical energy? Generators can generate electricity, so why can't they use electricity in reverse? I think this is a very good idea, Mr. Graham, why don't you give it a try? Graham nodded slowly, then suddenly came to his senses, with an excited smile on his face, looking at Carlo with gratitude. Oh my god. What a wonderful idea, why didn't I think of it? Your Majesty, you are a genius. If you were also engaged in electrical work, I'm afraid those electrical scientists would have no food to eat long ago. Carlo smiled and shook his head. This is just an idea that came to my mind. Whether it will work depends on specific experiments. It is quite simple to conduct relevant experiments. Graham had 2 DC generators brought in and began testing the generators and motors. The testing principle is also very simple. Carefully, Graham ordered his men, start the first generator. As the countdown continued, the first generator officially started. Electricity is generated. The current passed through the test circuit, and the experimenter successfully detected the generation of electricity at the same time with a crazy face, and even tears were brewing in the corners of his eyes. The other experimenters were not much better. They did not expect that the use of electrical energy could be realized by Carlo's magical idea. Your Majesty, I have a good idea. Please wait a few minutes. Graham, who had discovered the electric motor, could no longer contain his excitement and asked Carlo. Carlo nodded and waited quietly for Graham to realize his idea principle. A small waterfall device with a reservoir above and below the waterfall. When the water in the upper reservoir is released, the water engine generates electricity. The electricity is then transmitted to the electric motor below, and the operation of the motor can pump water from the reservoir below and return it to the reservoir above. Of course, this is just a demonstration of the use of electrical energy, not a perfect circulation device. Such a device is not a perpetual motion machine, and there will be additional consumption of electricity during the generation and use stages. Graham's purpose in making such a device is just to show the role of the generator and motor more clearly. This novel device immediately attracted the admiration of everyone in the laboratory, and even Carlo was quite surprised. This also shows the brains and hands-on ability of scientists of this era. As soon as the electric motor was discovered, it was possible to create a corresponding simulated usage scenario. Carlo is even more curious about what kind of rapid progress the power industry will have in the future. The second update of 4,000 words. Please support. It's the 4th day of daily 10,000 views, and 6,000,000 views have been updated. Please support. The remaining 4,000 words may be finished after 12 o'clock and before 2:30. Chapter 92 University Vision. Looking at the demonstration device of the generator and motor that he made with his own hands, Graham couldn't help but shed tears. As an explorer in the electricity industry, Graham devoted his entire life to electricity experiments, always thinking about whether his electricity research would be fruitful. The results have been achieved, but they were born because of Carlo's words, which also made Graham feel very emotional. Your Majesty, you are the real hero of the power industry. If electricity is fortunate enough to be adopted by countries all over the world, you will play a vital role in the progress of mankind and the development of the world. Graham Poe said to Carlo with some emotion. No, this is not my credit. Carlo shook his head and gave the credit to Graham and a group of power researchers. This is the result of your hard work. I just provided an idea. If it weren't for your long-term research on the power industry and the creation of generators that can be used for experiments, my ideas would remain just ideas. Mr. Graham, all the researchers involved in this experiment, you are the heroes of electrical progress. To celebrate the new achievements and experiments, I will prepare a celebratory party for you, and each of you will receive a check from the Royal Bank. Gentlemen, please keep up the good work. I will not let you down, and Spain will not forget your contribution. Carlo's speech won the favor of everyone in the laboratory. Apart from anything else, the number on the check represented real money, and even these laboratory staff whose salaries had already significantly increased were reluctant to refuse it. What's more, they had no reason to refuse. Carlo had already attributed all the credit to them, and they had become the heroes of Spain. As for these experimenters, Carlo still adopted the method of winning their hearts and minds. After all, they came all the way from France to Spain, and Carlo would not treat these researchers who were willing to become Spanish citizens unfairly. After encouraging the researchers in the power laboratory again, Carlo walked out of the power laboratory with great satisfaction and went to the engine research laboratory next door to check the progress. Since we have already come to the experimental area for inspection, we might as well visit both laboratories. This will also allow us to see the progress of Benz and his team's experiments on the engine. The engine laboratory is much quieter than the power laboratory. After all the employees combined only account for less than 1/6 of the number there. However, Benz, Daimler and Maybach, who worked in the engine laboratory, all became famous figures in later generations, and Carlo's expectations for the engine laboratory were no less than those for the power laboratory. After all, engines have a wide range of uses. In addition to common transportation tools such as airplanes and cars, they can also be used in agricultural machinery such as tractors and military weapons such as fighter jets and tanks. If the engine is well researched, it will be of great help to both the civilian and military fields in the future. Although Carlo did not expect Benz and his team to develop a particularly powerful engine, as long as they could maintain a certain lead in the current engine research field of various countries in the world, or remain in the top 3, Carlo's expectations would be met. Anyway, there will be more talents in the engine field in the future, and it won't be too late to recruit them one by one then. Current engines, like electricity, are in their infancy. Even famous engine developers like Diesel are only in their teens. Arriving directly at the engine laboratory, Benz and the other took quickly notice, Carlo said with a smile. Hearing Carlo's words, Benz and others immediately felt a sense of urgency. The construction time of the power laboratory and the engine laboratory was the same, and they and Graham and others came to Spain only a few days apart. But during these few days, the electrical laboratory has achieved results that are enough to alarm Carlo. Their engine laboratory is still in the process of intense research and design, and is obviously far behind the power laboratory. Your Majesty, our 4-stroke engine is already in the process of design and experimentation. It is expected that relevant finished products will enter the experiment within 2 years, and a relatively complete 4-stroke engine will begin testing within 5 years. Benz hurriedly reported the progress of the engine laboratory. 4-stroke engine? Carlo asked. Yes, the 4-stroke engine will consist of 4 piston strokes, namely the intake stroke, compression stroke, power stroke and exhaust stroke. In our imagination, if such a 4-stroke engine can be realized, the thermal efficiency will be increased from 11% of the atmospheric pressure engine to more than 13%, and the mass and volume of the engine can be effectively reduced. If such an engine is realized, perhaps we can explore related vehicle improvements based on such an engine. Daimler went on to introduce. Speaking of 4-stroke engines, this is something that Daimler and Maybach have already started researching in Germany. The so-called thermal efficiency is also easy to understand. Pressure engine is only 11%, which means that about 89% of the fuel will be wasted, which is quite exaggerated. Another problem is that the size of the atmospheric pressure engine is not suitable for installation on a carriage for vehicle modification. If an atmospheric pressure engine is used, the vehicle will be too large. Because of its large size, the vehicle will not only look bulky, but also be quite bulky in motion. Such a bulky vehicle is no match for a horse-drawn carriage, which is why a large number of factories are exploring engine improvements. The engine is the heart of a vehicle, and its advancement is related to the advancement of the vehicle. If there is any problem with the engine, it is like a heart attack in a person, which is fatal to the vehicle. Carlo nodded, but was somewhat dissatisfied with the progress of the engine laboratory. It takes 2 years to get a finished product into the experiment, and 5 years to get a perfect experimental product for testing. Doesn't this mean that it will take at least 5 years for the 4-stroke engine to be perfected and put into use? Isn't this time too long? Can we compress the time a little bit so that we can see the finished product of the 4-stroke engine earlier? Carlo frowned and asked with some dissatisfaction. Your Majesty, it's not that we don't want to compress the time. It's just that the laboratory is seriously short of manpower. Most of the design and testing need to be done by us. At least half of the entire R&D cycle is wasted. If there are enough people available, I'm confident that within 3 years, His Majesty will be able to see the finished product of the 4-stroke engine, and it will be a product that has been tested, stable and applicable. Daimler said helplessly. If it was the previous German company, although they were also responsible for the specific research and development, at least they had enough available people. Unlike now in Spain, although the specific treatment is indeed impeccable, there are too few people available under your command. The dozen or 20 people that Carlo tried his best to put together knew very little about engines, and they needed some time to learn and grow. During this period, the research on 4-stroke engines was almost entirely carried out personally by Benz and 3 others. It is difficult for 3 people to develop a complete 4-stroke engine, not to mention compressing the time cost, which is even more difficult. Carlo nodded. He also knew that the engine laboratory was short of staff to strive for our 4-stroke engine to be launched earlier. Carlo comforted. Although the engine field is still in its infancy, this does not mean that there will be a shortage of engine-related talents around the world. Apart from anything else, the very generous immigration conditions can still attract hundreds of relevant talents, but the quality is definitely not as high as Benz and the other 3. However, the current engine laboratory does not really need highly capable people. Someone with an upper middle level who can help out is enough. Benz and the other 3 have been tested in history. If they are not the top talents in the field of automobiles and engines, they are definitely above excellent talents. Moreover, the 4-stroke engine was originally researched by them, but it was only at Otto. Now that they have come to Spain, with Carlo's stronger support, I believe they will develop the 4-stroke engine earlier than the original world, and manufacture experimental vehicles based on the developed engine. Benz and others breathed a sigh of relief when they heard Carlo promised to increase the number of researchers in the engine laboratory to more than 100 within 2 years. Some experiments really cannot be carried out with just a few people. With collective wisdom, the feasibility of the experiment will be greatly increased. Thinking of this, Carlo couldn't help but feel a headache. It now seems that there is a huge gap between Spain and Italy, Britain, France, and Germany. It has more than enough upper middle level talent. Spain is already lagging far behind in this regard. Not only is there a shortage of top talent in Spain, but even the backbone of the laboratories is also very scarce. It's not enough that there are not many physics and chemistry majors in Spanish universities. Most of them are just for show, and it is difficult to cultivate sufficiently good physics and chemistry talents. After leaving the experimental area, Carlo went straight to the palace. In order to improve the lack of talent in Spain, Carlo decided to build a university dedicated to training talents in physics and chemistry. Carlo had already thought of the name of the university, which was the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry. Lauren also agreed, and gave his own reasons. "I think it is necessary to build such a university, Your Majesty. With the word royal in its name, the outstanding graduates of this university will know for whom they should work and serve. Do we have enough funds? If we want to build such a university, when can we start recruiting students at the earliest?" Carlo nodded, and became more determined to build a university. However, it still takes a long time to build a university from scratch, especially whether it is school facilities, the construction of laboratories for experiments, or the purchase of teaching materials. The introduction of some famous university teachers and professors is very important. Without good teachers, it would be difficult for such a university to produce sufficiently excellent graduates. If you want to attract good enough physicists and chemists from all over the world, you need money, and you may even have to promise some extra conditions. It should be no problem. Butler Lauren agreed. He knew how much money the royal family had at the moment. If you want to build a university from scratch, it will probably take at least 3 years before you can start school and enroll students. However, if the reconstruction is carried out in a more suitable building, and only relevant laboratories are built, the time cost should be shortened to a certain extent. However, if you want to build a university that can continuously cultivate talents, it is essential to spend a certain amount of time. I estimate that it will take at least 2 to 3 years to build the university, and the total amount of money we need to spend will be at least 10 million pesetas. Butler Lauren replied. Carlo nodded, not surprised by the huge amount of money. In fact, building a university itself does not cost much money. The biggest cost is setting up laboratories and purchasing teaching materials and experimental equipment cultivate outstanding talents. It's not that Carlo doesn't trust the universities in Spain. The problem is that their own majors are not of much use to Spain. Several universities are famous for literature and art. Why does Spain need so many people engaged in literature and art nowadays? At present, physics and chemistry are the top priorities in universities, and medical care is also very important. The next is education, which can train more excellent teachers, and in turn train more students to apply for university in Spain. The third update of 4,000 words. Please support. It's the 4th day of daily 10,000 views, and 10,000,000 views have been updated. Please support. Chapter 93 Principal Candidate. Butler Lauren also saw Carlo's anticipation and urgency for building the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry. After receiving the order from Carlo, Butler Lauren immediately began to plan the site for the school and carry out some preliminary preparations. The Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry was bound to be built near Madrid, and the site was naturally chosen on the outskirts of Madrid. The good news is that there is a place outside Madrid where a private university was once built, but it eventually closed down. The building here can still be used after repairs, and only needs to build some laboratories to basically meet the initial use of a university. Although Carlo maintained high expectations for the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry, he did not expect to make it a world-renowned science university in the first few years of its construction. Carlo hopes that within 5 years, the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry will be able to steadily train more than 500 physics and chemistry-related talents every year. With the accumulation of little by little, Spain can still make up for a considerable gap in talent reserves. At least in certain research areas there is not as much shortage of people as it is now. After handing over the construction of the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry to Butler Lauren, Carlo turned his attention to how to select a suitable dean for the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry. Although it is a college of physics and chemistry, it does not mean that the dean of the college must be proficient in physics and chemistry. After all, imparting knowledge is what university teachers and professors should do, and the university president should pay more attention to the development of the school and think about how to cultivate more talents for Carlo in Spain. Considering that Butler Lauren was quite busy, Carlo gave the task of selecting a suitable candidate for the dean of the academy in Spain to Carlo. Carlo did not disappoint Carlo's trust. After a week of investigation, he submitted a specific list of candidates to Carlo. Jose Chegaray. Carlo looked at the name on the list and seemed to have some impression of it, but he seemed to be unable to remember it. Yes, Your Majesty. Mr. Echegaray was born in Madrid and has Basque ancestry. He currently works at the Madrid Academy of Precision Sciences and has published the theory of the physical unification of current material forces and analytical geometry problems. His teaching ability is outstanding in Spain, Carlo explained. Carlo nodded and looked at the detailed information about Echegaray. Judging from the current investigation results, although Echegaray is of Basque descent, he was born in Madrid and is more supportive of the rule of the Spanish royal government. From this point of view alone, Echegaray already has certain advantages. Appointing him as the dean of the academy can also let the Basques understand that Carlo himself has the same attitude towards the Spaniards and the Basques, and the Spaniards will not reject the existence of the Basques. As he watched, Carlo finally remembered who Echegaray was. Echegaray was quite famous in Spain. He was one of the few Spanish Nobel Prize winners and the first Spanish Nobel Prize winner. But the problem is that, in Carlo's memory, all Spanish Nobel Prize winners had nothing to do with physics and chemistry, and Echegaray seemed to have won the prize in literature. Isn't it a bit strange that a talent in literature is appointed as the dean of the School of Physics and Chemistry? Jose Echegaray? Carlo asked in surprise. If I remember correctly, he seems to. I can only say that Mr. Echegaray's interest in literature is no less than his achievements in mathematics, but he is indeed more famous for mathematics and civil engineering so far. Carlo nodded, dispelling his surprise. If Echegaray is a mathematician, it is not surprising that he is the dean of the Faculty of Physics and Chemistry. After all, subjects like mathematics are closely related to physics and chemistry, and mathematics, physics and chemistry are inseparable to a certain extent. After getting over his surprise, Carlo couldn't help but admire Echegaray. To have made great achievements in mathematics, public works and literature at the same time, in later generations, he would at least be considered a master of both arts and sciences. Although he did not win any important awards in mathematics, his mathematics teaching career is well known in Spain. His interest in literature even earned him the Nobel Prize in Literature, one of the highest academic awards in history. All-round talents in Spain. Looking at Echegaray, and then looking at the other candidates on the list, the gap can already be seen. Spain currently does not have any top talents in physics and chemistry, and even fewer people are suitable to serve as deans of the School of Physics and Chemistry. Among the many candidates, Echegaray is indeed the most suitable candidate in terms of his resume and personal ability. Rubbing his brows, Carlo finally made a decision. The candidate for the president of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry is tentatively decided to be Echegaray. Let him come to see me tomorrow. The construction of the college will be completed as early as next year, and I hope that the establishment of the college can also be carried out earlier. Historically, Echegaray should have served as a minister in the Spanish government during this period, but now because Prime Minister Primo was not assassinated, the Spanish government has not changed much compared to before. Apart from serving as the Director of Public Works during the interim government period, Echegaray has not been involved much in officialdom. Although the president of the soon-to-be-established Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry has no administrative rank, it does not mean that his influence will be low. If he could gain Carlo's trust and complete his term as college president, he would certainly have the opportunity to enter politics. Moreover, talents trained by the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry have a better chance of entering the Royal Academy of Sciences and even being awarded a knighthood through their scientific research. If that day really comes, the influence of the president of the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry will be further enhanced, and it will be easier to enter politics. Early the next morning, Echegaray came to the palace and asked to see Carlo. Carlo had just gotten up and washed up with the help of the maid when he heard the guard report that Echegaray had been waiting for a long time. Carlo was a little amused by Echegaray's early arrival, so he decided to invite Echegaray to have breakfast with him and discuss the future development of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry. When Echegaray was led by the guards to Carlo's favorite small restaurant, he felt a little uneasy. Although he was born in Madrid and had achieved considerable success in his teaching career, this was the first time he was invited to breakfast by the king. Even having breakfast together was the first time for him to meet the king in private. Although he was quite supportive of the Spanish government, Queen Isabel was not interested in an academic. "Your Majesty." The moment he saw Carlo, Echegaray performed a standard Spanish etiquette and greeted Carlo nervously. "Good morning, Mr. Echegaray." Carlo nodded and motioned Echegaray to sit down and meet the king. After feeling Carlo's kindness and approachability, Echegaray couldn't help but relax a little and was not so nervous. "Mr. Echegaray, has Cardinal told you my decision?" Carlo asked with a smile. When faced with talented people who can be used by him, Carlo is quite willing to treat them with kindness. When a king shows a kind and approachable attitude, it is impossible for those who are born in a monarchy to be moved, not to mention those who were born in a monarchy, even those who have been bathed in the concept of republicanism since childhood. Mr. Caddy has already said, "Your Majesty, it is my honor to serve as the president of the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry. I will do my best to build the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry and live up to your trust." Echegaray nodded, very grateful and honored. The ordinary physics and chemistry schools were not that attractive to Echegaray. But if the word royal was added, the attraction to Echegaray would rise sharply. Serving as president of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry is not only a resume building exercise, it also allows Echegaray to enter Carlo's sight. If the dean of the college does a good job, there may be further opportunities in the future. Although the Spanish cabinet is appointed by the prime minister, who is elected from the House of Representatives. But for Carlo, the King of Spain, if he wanted to promote someone, it would not be difficult to get him into politics. "Mr. Echegaray, do you have any plans for the construction of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry?" Carlo nodded and gave his test with a smile. Although being the Dean of the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry does not require top-notch knowledge, one must at least be proficient in the operation of an academy and know what Carlo's purpose is. Comparing the School of Physics and Chemistry to a company, the Dean, as the manager of the company, must have a reasonable development plan for the entire company and satisfy Carlo's plan for the company's development as well as the shareholders behind the company. The first update of 3,000 words. Please support. It's the 5th day with 10,000 views per day, and 3,000,000 views have been updated. Please support. Chapter 94 talks. What are the plans for the future development of the Royal Academy of Physics and Chemistry? Echegaray did not rush to answer Carlo's question. Instead, he thought carefully and organized his words in his mind before answering. "Your Majesty's purpose in establishing the Royal Academy of Physics and Chemistry should be based on Spain's thirst for physical and chemical talents. Physics and chemistry majors are not highly valued in Spanish universities, which has led to a lack of graduate outstandings in physics and chemistry in Spain. I have 3 considerations for the future development plans of the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry. First, we will hire as many outstanding professors and experts in physics and chemistry as possible from all over Europe and use their professional knowledge to train more outstanding graduates for us. Second, the education situation in Spain means that the number of students in our school will be limited in the future. I think the scale of the college cannot be large, at least until the education situation in Spain improves. I suggest the limiting number of students admitted to the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry to about 400 per year. Although 400 places are not many, if we focus on training these 400 people, perhaps the level of graduates from the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry will be higher than that of ordinary universities. After the educational situation in Spain improves, it will not be too late to increase the number of admissions each year in stages, so that Spain has more talents. The third point is to provide certain subsidies and attention to the students of the college. In fact, it is not just Spain. In many countries and universities, students cannot afford tuition and are forced to drop out. If this happens, we are likely to miss out on a potential physical and chemical scientist. It would be better to directly subsidize students in the college and reduce their tuition fees to ensure that talented students can be better trained. After listening to Echegaray's opinions, Carlo was even more satisfied with appointing him as the president of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry. Today's universities are not like the universities of the future. They cover a terrifyingly large area and have countless graduates every. Today's universities tend to be smaller in scale. The average number of students enrolled in Spanish universities each year is around 200 to 500. There are even very few universities in the world that enroll more than 1,000 students each year. Why is Carlo so eager to train college students? Because a college diploma in this era is almost the top academic qualification. Not to mention a university diploma. People with only primary school education are considered educated and cultured in Spain, and people with only secondary school education are the group that some factories and companies give priority to recruiting. As for university graduates, they generally have no trouble finding a job. After graduating from university, including Echegaray himself, current university graduates can choose to stay on as professors, continue to engage in research related to their majors, or find a higher paying job. It is still easy to become a member of the middle class. As for why there are so few college students, for countries with a relatively high level of education, the high tuition fees for colleges are the main reason. For a country like Spain with a relatively low level of education, in addition to the high tuition fees for universities, another reason is that most of the people are illiterate or have only primary school education. Can we expect these illiterate people and those with only primary school education to apply for university? What Echegaray said about the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry initially limiting the number of students to 400 was actually not much different from the 500 that Carlo was considering, and this was something Carlo was quite satisfied with. If Echegaray boasted that the school would enroll thousands of students, Carlo would be skeptical and question it. It is best to limit the number of students admitted to the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry to less than 500. For a university that is still under construction, enrolling too many students would be an additional burden. What Carlo wants is talent in physical chemistry who has graduated from university and has a rich knowledge base and certain hands-on skills, rather than college students who only have academic qualifications. The most important thing is to have a rich knowledge reserve and hands-on ability. As for the academic qualifications of college students, they are just an additional supplement to studying in college. Very good. Carlo nodded with satisfaction and said to Echegaray with a smile on his face, "From now on, you are the Dean of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry. I hope that under your leadership, this institute can become the highest institution of physics and chemistry in Spain and a holy place for physics and chemistry talents in the whole of Europe. If you have any funding issues in the construction of the academy, you can apply for more funding from Butler Lauren. I look forward to the results of the academy's construction, and also to the heights that the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry can reach under your leadership. It is my honor, Your Majesty." Echegaray stood up and said with honor and excitement, "I will never let you down. The Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry will become the cradle of Spanish scientists and provide you with a steady stream of scientific talents." A pleasant meeting ended just like that. After enjoying a not so luxurious but very rich breakfast in Carlo's private restaurant, Echegaray said goodbye to Carlo and went back to prepare for the construction of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry. After all, it is a newly built university, and serving as the president of the Royal Institute of Physical Chemistry is more difficult than serving as the president of other universities. But there are also many benefits, more awards. Not long after Echegaray left, Prime Minister Primo came to see Carlo to report on the construction of the colony in southern Morocco. After the signing of the peace treaty, the Spanish army began to take over all the land south of the line from Agadi to Tata. With the British government as a witness, the Moroccan government was very sensible. Although it was painful, it obediently withdrew from these areas and handed over control to the Spanish army and government. Now that the Spanish army has successfully taken over the area, it is time to discuss the establishment of the South Morocco colony and the selection of the colonial governor. Prime Minister Primo still remembered that Carlo had previously intended to let Primo recommend the candidate for the colonial governor himself. This time I came to report on my work and also wanted to test Carlo's intentions to see what Carlo's purpose was so that I could decide my next move. Carlo was also looking forward to the establishment of the southern Morocco colony. The history of the Spanish Empire is long gone, and currently Spain has only two relatively large colonies, Cuba and the Philippines, and the remaining colonies are all small-scale territories. After the establishment of the South Morocco colony, Carlo not only did not cause the Spanish government to lose a colony, but instead gained a colony very close to home. Although Agadir is of a certain size in this colony, the other lands are basically uninhabited, but at least it is still a colony. More importantly, the establishment of the colony of southern Morocco also meant that during Carlo's reign, the focus of Spanish colonial development officially came to Africa. In the future, once the situation stabilizes, and there is a suitable opportunity, Carlo will consider selling Cuba and the Philippines to other countries in exchange for some other benefits. In fact, according to the current situation in Spain, there are still nearly 30 years before the Spanish-American War. Spain has every opportunity to develop into a great power before the Spanish-American War. As long as Spain had the strength to become a great power, the United States in 1898 would not have the courage to go to war with Spain. But if it's just Cuba, is it necessary to fight with the United States? This is a question worth considering. Cuba can indeed bring positive benefits to the Spanish government, but the problem is that Cubans are restless conflicts with the Americans over Cuba. It would be better to sell Cuba earlier in exchange for some colonies that can also generate profits, while also provoking relations between other countries and the United States. Whether it is sold to the United States or other countries, in theory, it is not a big loss. After all, Cuba is a land that is difficult to localize, and Spain may not be able to defend it for a lifetime, even if it can defend it for a day. Carlo remembered that before the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, the United States had proposed to the Spanish government to purchase the Cuban colony for $100 million. But how could the proud Spanish government agree to the US request? In the eyes of Europeans, the US was just an upstart, whose status as a great power was entirely based on its economy and industry, and its military was weak. But the Spaniards did not expect that after the outbreak of the Spanish-American War, not only would they lose the Cuban colony worth $100 million, but also another larger colony, the Philippines. Spain's glory has completely become a thing of the past, completely become a second-rate country in Europe, and no longer has the qualifications to become a great power. Although Spain in this world is not afraid of the threat from the United States, it is not cost effective to continue to fight with the United States. If the costs spent on fighting the United States had been invested in seizing African colonies, it might have been possible to capture some colonies that were more profitable than Congo. Morocco will not dare to provoke in the short term, but we can still make some plans for the Guinea and Congo regions. Carlo had even made a plan for the future development of Spain by using the vast resources of the colonies to build Spain's industry and economy. The industrial products produced could be shipped to Central and South America for sale. Although most of Spain's colonies in the Americas have been lost, a large number of countries in Central and South America, including Mexico, still have a large Spanish mixed population who also speak Spanish. A considerable number of these people remain close to Spain. If economic actions are taken, it should be possible to win over some countries, to form a customs alliance, to dump Spanish industrial products. The second update of 3,000 words. Please support. It's the 5th day of daily 10,000 views, and 6,000,000 views have been updated. Please support. There is another update of 4,000 words expected to be published before 2:30. Chapter 95 Antonio Canovas del Castillo. Now that the South Morocco colony is ready to be established, it is natural to consider the issue of selecting the governor of the South Morocco colony. Carlo still had the same idea as before. The current governor of the South Morocco colony would not be of much use to Carlo, and Carlo did not have a suitable candidate for this position. It would be better to exchange interests with Prime Minister Primo, and consider future interests, future power. A post of Governor General of the South Morocco colony in exchange for a cabinet minister seat. This deal would be a win-win for both Carlo and Prime Minister Primo. Because Carlo has long expressed his support for Prime Minister Primo's reforms, this cabinet minister's seat will not only not affect Prime Minister Primo's reforms, but will instead become a boost to Prime Minister Primo's reforms. The position of governor of the southern Morocco colony can also increase Prime Minister Primo's influence to suppress those forces that oppose reform. Carlo would not lose out either. After all, the colonial governors needed to be appointed by Carlo, and the governor of the southern Moroccan colony would not resist Carlo's rule. The cabinet minister seat he obtained in exchange will also allow Carlo to cultivate his own confidence in the government and prepare for the power transition after Prime Minister Primo retires in the future. The majority of the current government supports the monarchy, but this does not mean that the future government will still be like this. Carlo will not let others decide his fate. Only by having enough say in the government can he ensure that his power will not be shaken by any accidents. Hearing that Carlo wanted to trade the position of governor of the South Morocco colony for a cabinet minister seat, Prime Minister Primo frowned and thought for a moment, then decided to agree. Your Majesty, your proposal is certainly acceptable. But the Minister of Finance and Industry cannot be easily moved. I can think of ways to deal with other positions. Prime Minister Primo said. Although he agreed to exchange the position of colonial governor for a cabinet minister seat, this did not mean that all cabinet departments could be selected by Carlo. The most important are the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Industry. The Ministry of Finance is in charge of the country's funds, which Prime Minister Primo must keep in his hands. Ministry of Finance to the government and the country. After all, the finance department is in charge of a country's money, and the scale of this money is huge enough to exceed the imagination of normal people. Prime Minister Primo's reforms require a lot of money everywhere, and he is certainly unwilling to give up supervision of the financial sector. The industrial sector is also quite important as one of Prime Minister Primo's plans for reforming Spain. The position of Minister of Industry is basically a hotly contested position, because Spain's industry is destined to have significant growth in the future, and the Minister of Industry can basically earn credit without doing anything. In addition to the Ministry of Finance and the Industrial Department, although other departments are also important, it is not a bad idea to replace the position of colonial governor. Prime Minister Primo and Marshal Serrano have both served as governors of colonies, which is not only a brilliant resume, but also a way to hone one's abilities. Carlo nodded, not surprised by Prime Minister Primo's request. It would be a problem if Prime Minister Primo allowed Carlo to choose any cabinet position. After all, a national government always has some more important departments and some relatively less important departments. Although neither Carlo nor Prime Minister Primo mentioned the Ministry of Defense where Marshal Serrano worked, neither of them had any objection to the selection of Defense Minister. Marshal Serrano's position as Minister of Defense is quite stable. Even Prime Minister Primo, who has enough reputation in the military, will not easily abolish Marshal Serrano's position. There is no need to say more about Carlo. Marshal Serrano is very close to the royal power represented by Carlo. So how could Carlo destroy the relationship between him and Marshal Serrano? If Marshal Serrano was not older than Prime Minister Primo, Carlo even planned to let Marshal Serrano take charge of the transitional government after Prime Minister Primo retired, and then train his own confidants to lead the government after Marshal Serrano. Carlo's choice was Secretary of State for Agriculture. Spain is an agricultural country, so the position of Minister of Agriculture is quite important. Moreover, Spain has previously reduced taxes for farmers, and agriculture is destined to usher in a golden period of development in the future. The position of Minister of Agriculture is also destined to make considerable contributions in the future. Combined with the propaganda capabilities of Carlo's public opinion empire, it should not be a problem to cultivate a representative figure who has influence and support in both the political arena and among the people. Upon hearing that Carlo chose the position of Minister of Agriculture, Primo signed silently without any objection. The two quickly reached an agreement. After Prime Minister Primo selected a suitable candidate for colonial governor, he would submit it to Carlo for confirmation. After Carlo's confirmation, the colonial governor will be appointed, and the vacant position of Minister of Agriculture will also be filled by Carlo's nominee. This was a relatively normal exchange of political interests. Both parties got what they needed, and the result made Primo and Carlo very satisfied. After forecasting the specific work, Prime Minister Primo returned to the government to preside over his own affairs, while Carlo carefully selected the new Minister of Agriculture. Speaking of the candidate for Minister of Agriculture, Carlo actually has a candidate in mind, but he is not sure whether he can trust him. After all, the position of Minister of Agriculture is not only one of the cabinet ministers, but also the beginning of Carlo's influence on the government. The candidate that made Carlo somewhat hesitant was named Antonio Canovas del Castillo, one of the main representatives of the Spanish royalists. As a conservative, Antonio Canovas del Castillo expressed strong support for the monarchy, which should have been Carlo's absolute support. But here lies the problem. Antonio Canovas del Castillo is a Spaniard who supports the monarchy, but he is a veteran minister who served during the reign of Queen Isabel, and was once loyal to her. Carlo even began to doubt whether Antonio Canovas del Castillo was loyal to the monarchy, or to the Bourbon family and Queen Isabel. Faced with this staunch royalist of the Conservative Party, Carlo instead doubted his loyalty to him, which was why Carlo was a little hesitant. Is indeed a more suitable candidate. He served as Minister of the Interior and Minister of Overseas Territories during the reign of Queen Isabel. If Queen Isabel's rule had not been overthrown, he would even have had the hope of becoming Prime Minister. Another point is that Antonio Canovas del Castillo was born in 1828. He was 18 years younger than Marshal Serrano and 14 years younger than Prime Minister Primo, which was the golden age of his political career. Carlo chose him as a candidate with this in mind. His age qualified him to wait for Prime Minister Primo's retirement and seek major advancement in his political career after Prime Minister Primo's retirement. Should he choose such a royalist minister who seemed to only protect the king and not himself? Carlo was a little hesitant. After thinking for a long time, Carlo finally decided to meet this old minister from Queen Isabella's time to see if he could be of use to him. If someone is unable to be loyal to you and work for you, it is better to find someone else. After all, what Carlo wants to train is the Prime Minister of the transitional government after Prime Minister Primo, not an ordinary cabinet minister. If you don't trust someone, the best way is to find you trust. Trust people you employ, and don't employ people you don't trust. Carlo deliberately arranged to meet Antonio Canovas del Castillo in Queen Isabel's favorite reception room. Not only are there antique paintings and calligraphy from Europe and even the world, but there are also a variety of luxury goods, murals, and ornaments. This reception room alone is worth hundreds of thousands of pesetas. Those who can be received in this reception room are generally only the king's confidants. Antonio Canovas del Castillo had mixed feelings as he returned to this huge and luxurious reception room after several years. The monarch before him has changed from Queen Isabella to the younger Carlo, and the Spanish government has long since changed from an autocratic royal government to a reformed constitutional government. Your Majesty. Antonio Canovas del Castillo respectfully performed a Spanish noble salute to Carlo, keeping his posture very low. Canovas looked humble and respectful, and carefully sat on the stool next to him, without any impoliteness in his behavior. You served as Minister of the Interior 6 years ago, and Minister of Overseas Territories 4 years ago, right? Carlo asked with a smile. Yes, Your Majesty. Antonio Canovas del Castillo nodded, not understanding Carlo's intention for the time being ideas. Carlo continued. It is my honor, Your Majesty. Antonio Canovas del Castillo stood up immediately, his eyes full of gratitude to Carlo. Sit down first. Carlo gestured for Canovas to sit down again, and then said with a hint of deep meaning, however, Mr. Canovas, before I recommend you as Minister of Agriculture, I would like to ask you a few questions. Your Majesty, please ask. Although Antonio Canovas del Castillo did not know what Carlo was going to ask, he knew that what he had to do now was to listen to the questions quietly and then answer honestly. You served as a cabinet minister during the reign of Queen Isabel, and you expressed support for the Bourbon dynasty during the provisional government. Mr. Canovas, I would like to ask you, is your loyalty to the king or to the Bourbon family? Carlo had a warm smile on his face, but his words made Canovas sweat a little. Of course I'm loyal to the king, Your Majesty. Antonio Canovas del Castillo stood up quickly and explained hastily, you are the king of Spain. I will always be loyal to only one person, and that is you, Your Majesty. The Bourbon dynasty is a thing of the past. The Spaniards have chosen a more suitable king. As a Spaniard, I will certainly support the Spaniards' decision. Not stupid. He certainly knew why Carlo asked this. If there was anything wrong with the answer, not to mention the Minister of Agriculture mentioned by Carlo, I'm afraid Canovas' political career would not be smooth in the future. After all, Primo would not offend Carlo for Canovas. Although Carlo's power was not great, he could still completely ban an official if he wanted. The political arena today is not so clean. Even if Carlo was the kind of king who would take revenge for every grievance, Canavas might not see the next day's sunshine after answering incorrectly. Although he did support the Bourbon dynasty, he would not be loyal to the Bourbon dynasty after Queen Isabel and the Carlos faction were driven away. Of course I believe you, Mr. Canavas. Carlo smiled and nodded, as if he believed what Canavas said. I'm just asking. Of course I believe in your loyalty. Mr. Canavas, I will recommend you to Prime Minister Primo. You royalists are my loyal subjects, and I will certainly not forget your contributions to the kingdom. Antonio Canavas del Castillo silently repeatedly, and said very respectfully, it is my honor to serve you, your majesty. No matter who ruled Spain in the past, the Spaniards today will always be your loyal subjects. Carlo's goal was not only to win over Canavas, the representative of the royalists, but also to use him to win over more royalists to their loyalty. Because the Bourbon dynasty ruled Spain for hundreds of years, most royalists still have a favorable impression of the Bourbon dynasty. What Carlo had to do was to make them understand that the House of Savoy was still the master of Spain. If these royalists could not be used for his own purposes, the best way was to ban them and cultivate a royalist faction loyal to the House of Savoy. The third update of 4,000 words. Please support. It's the 5th day with 10, tenths, 000 updated. Please support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 96 Christmas is coming. The exchange of interests between Carlo and Primo was quickly completed, and Antonio Canavas del Castillo successfully took office as the Spanish Minister of Agriculture and became a member of the cabinet. The candidate for the governor of the South Morocco colony had also been determined, and after Carlo's appointment, the framework of the colonial government was basically established. The good news is that the population of the entire South Morocco colony is not large, no more than 1 million in total, so it is quite simple to manage. After this war, Morocco in the north will also understand that they cannot afford to offend Spain, and at least they will not take the initiative to cause trouble in the short term. Under such circumstances, the South Morocco colony will experience a relatively stable period. In his report to Carlo, Prime Minister Primo also mentioned the next task of the South Morocco colonial government, which is the Catholicization of South Morocco. In the history of European colonization, missionary work and colonization are inseparable. A large number of European missionaries traveled around the world, spreading the ideas of Christianity to distant foreign countries' lands. As mentioned before, Moroccans are white people who believe in Islam. What Prime Minister Primo needs to do is to make Moroccans believe in Catholicism, so that they can be assimilated into the big family of Spanish people. Of course, if they were unwilling to join the ranks of the Catholic Spaniards, they would have to continue to be their own colonial natives, enduring the oppression of the colonial government and the indifference of the Europeans. In addition to spreading the Catholic faith, the southern Moroccan colony also had to unify the language within the colony and let the native Moroccans learn Spanish. Although Spain had lost a large number of colonies in South America, Spanish colonial rule was actually successful. People in countries like Argentina basically speak Spanish. They are a mixture of Spanish and local indigenous people and have a natural affinity for Spain. Colonies was able to assimilate quickly. After all, the difference between Spanish and Portuguese is not that big. It is more like the differences in dialects evolved in different regions. Of course, the promotion of Spanish cannot be limited to the colonies, but must also be vigorously carried out in the mainland. Especially for regions like Catalonia and the Basque Country that love to clamor for independence. The threat of independence can only be resolved by first letting them widely use Spanish and then letting them slowly accept the broad concept of Spaniards. In the early stages of nationalism, it is impossible to suppress it by force. Only by letting the Catalans and Basques accept the concept of Spanish from the bottom of their hearts, like José Echegaray, who has Basque ancestry, can these regions be completely stabilized. If you want to promote Spanish, you can't rely on coercion. However, this is still very simple. We just need to allow Spanish capital to flow into Catalonia in the Basque Country and create more jobs in these regions. The factories and businesses are run by Spaniards. It is normal for them to recruit people who can speak Spanish, right? If the local Catalans and Basques wanted to work in these factories, they would naturally have to learn Spanish. Of course, there will definitely be some extreme people who have certain opinions about Spanish capital entering the local area and only recruiting people who can speak Spanish. Carlo was hoping that these people would jump out. After dealing with these more radical people, the remaining people would naturally not be so radical. After all, there are still a large number of farmers and ordinary farmers, people who recognize the ruling status of the Spanish government, and those more radical nationalists are ultimately a minority. At this time, Spain still had hope of resolving the independence of Catalonia in the Basque region. In the future, when the nationalists in the two regions have reached a certain scale, it will be basically impossible to eliminate them. Unless another large-scale civil war breaks out, and the separatist element who oppose the Spanish government are completely eliminated, perhaps stability in Spain can be restored, and the rift between the Catalans and Basques and the Spaniards will become increasingly wider. In fact, it comes down to the fact that the overall size of the Spanish population is not large. If the Spanish population had 30 or 40 million, Carlo would not have to care so much about the Catalans and Basques. Prime Minister Primo's absolute power made Carlo feel at ease as a king. Apart from the weekly cabinet meetings, Carlo rarely showed up in the government and did not ask too much about government affairs. From occasionally caring about the development of the royal family's property, Carlo seemed to have nothing to do. He could only enjoy the massage and caring service of the maid while inspecting the construction and experimental area of the Royal Institute of Physics and Chemistry. Time passed quickly, and in the blink of an eye it was Christmas 1870. Almost a year and a half has passed since Carlo came to Spain. This also means that Spain's reform has also been going on for a year and a half. Carlo is still looking forward to the results of Prime Minister Primo's reform, and can also feel the changes that the reform has brought to Spain over the past year and a half. But despite the anticipation, the Christmas holiday is still necessary. This was Carlo's second Christmas in Spain, and he had a completely different mood from his first Christmas. Last Christmas, I had just arrived in Spain less than half a year ago, and the civil unrest in Spain had not yet been settled, so I celebrated a very simple Christmas. Now that the civil unrest has been quelled, Carlo naturally doesn't mind enjoying life, such as holding a celebratory banquet or something. Apart from the top government officials, the only people eligible to attend the banquet hosted by Carlo were the nobles. Of course, because the banquet hall of the royal palace was not very large, not all nobles could accept Carlo's invitation. Who made the Spanish aristocracy so huge? If all the nobles were gathered together, there would definitely be chaos. Even if we narrow it down to the nobles above the rank of marquis, the number of nobles invited alone would still be several dozen. Including their companions, the number of people attending the banquet exceeded 100. Together with the cabinet members headed by Prime Minister Primo, there were just over 100 people attending the banquet. Those who attended the banquet were all upper class people in Spain, and it was also one of Carlo's means to win over the aristocracy. There will be 2 updates today, and another one around 2 o'clock. Chapter 97 Government Work Progress. 1870 passed quickly, and 1871 came. Carlo attended the Spanish government's summary meeting for 1870 and asked the Spanish government about the progress of building industry and economy. The specific differences in Spain's development between the Primo government and the interim government can also be seen from the government work report submitted by Prime Minister Primo. During the provisional government period, the total railway mileage in Spain reached 5,400 kilometers. This railway mileage data is actually not much different from Italy's 5,700 kilometers. Although it is not as good as the tens of thousands of kilometers of railway mileage in Britain, France, and Germany, it is not bad. So the question is, why didn't Spain's 5,400 kilometers of railway mileage enable its economy to take off? The real reason is that the width of Spain's railway tracks is not consistent with that of other European countries. Spain's railways have completely become a transportation channel for domestic economy and materials, rather than an international trade route. Although the width of Spain's railway tracks are the same as that of Portugal, Portugal is a small country after all. If the Spanish economy wants to take off, it must speed up economic exchanges with other countries. Since Prime Minister Primo officially took office, the Spanish government has attached great importance to the construction of railways. From mid-1869 to the end of 1870, Spain built a total of more than 500 kilometers of railway lines, bringing the total railway mileage close to 6,000 kilometers. For the Spanish government, this speed of railway construction is far faster than before. From the birth of railways to 1869, Spain only built 5,400 kilometers of railways, but since Prime Minister Primo took office, 500 kilometers of railways have been built in 1 year. This is one of Prime Minister Primo's achievements. Of course, in addition to railways, roads are also a very important part of the Spanish government's construction. Over the past year and a half, the Spanish government has built a total of 4,132 kilometers of roads, including more than 1,500 kilometers of two-way 4-lane main roads. There are always areas that cannot be reached by railways, so it becomes necessary to build roads. With the birth of the car, the importance of roads will increase infinitely. The importance of road construction to the Spanish government will not decrease in the future, and roads and railways will also be one of the main construction goals of the Spanish government in the future. Carlo also focused on the educational situation in Spain. When Carlo first arrived in Spain, the illiterate population accounted for more than 70% of the total population. So far, more than 1 million people have received literacy education, and the illiterate rate has been reduced by at least 5%. It is expected that in the next 4 years, the illiterate population in Spain should be able to reduce by about 15% to 20%. Carlo's long-term goal is to reduce the illiterate population in Spain to less than 40% of the total population before 1880, and to less than 10% of the total population before 1900. The ultimate long-term goal is to achieve zero illiteracy in Spain. Only by fully implementing free primary education can Spanish teenagers enter society with sufficient knowledge and become skilled workers and other occupations needed by the country. Only when more and more people receive education and eventually all children of school age can receive education above primary school, can universities be guaranteed to have enough students when recruiting students. It makes sense that education should start from childhood. If you don't even receive primary education, how can you skip middle school and high school and directly apply for university? Speaking of universities, all the universities in Spain combined currently enroll more than 4,000 students each year. But among these 4,000 people, less than 1,000 chose majors related to physics and chemistry. There are too many students majoring in literature and art in Spanish universities. Even architectural engineering is more popular than physics and chemistry. Spain obviously does not need so many students of literature and art. The next plan is to transform some universities. Either build them into comprehensive universities, or directly transform them into science universities, and integrate the colleges of literature together. Just 1 or 2 universities will be enough. It is still difficult to achieve such integration, because most universities in Spain are private institutions and there are very few universities established by the government. The only thing that made Carlo feel relieved was that the population of Spain grew steadily in 1869 and 1870. In 1868, the population growth rate in Spain was the lowest in the past decade. This was not only due to the outbreak of the revolution, but also because a large number of Spanish farmers could not afford to raise children in the face of the government's harsh taxes. Since they could not afford to raise children, the best way was not to have children. After the revolution, the population growth rate returned to normal levels. Although it is impossible to accurately count the entire population of Spain, we can roughly estimate the current population of Spain, based on the population increase and decrease in various places, and it has basically exceeded 16.8 million. In 1870 alone, the Spanish population grew by at least 150,000 people. If it weren't for the underdeveloped medical system that led to a large number of premature deaths, the population growth figure would probably have doubled. The low survival rate of newborns and young children is a major problem currently faced by all European countries. not to mention ordinary civilians. Even among nobles and royal families, childhood death is very common. For example, Carlo's father, Vittorio Emanuele II, had 2 sons who died young, one of whom only lived for a few days. Carlo was generally satisfied with his travel to this world. The only thing he was not satisfied with was the backward medical technology in this world, which was too bad compared to later generations. Although the Industrial Revolution brought considerable strength to European countries, it did not bring about such great progress in medical technology. Although there are constant breakthroughs in biology and medicine in various countries, the fact that the average life expectancy in Europeans remains below 40 years old is enough to prove the poor medical environment of this era. European civilians are being exploited by capitalists, working more than 10 hours a day, and living to around 40 years old is already quite good. Although there is currently no specific working hour system in Spain, some of the royal family's companies have repeatedly and clearly required that workers should not work more than 12 hours a day. Carlo is the king, so it is impossible for him to exploit the workers wantonly. In addition to the clear requirement that daily working hours should not exceed 12 hours, the royal family's enterprises allow employees to have 1 day off per month to relieve long accumulated fatigue and sleepiness. Second update, please support. Chapter 98 Revenue and Budget. Regarding the government's development report, Carlo is actually more interested in the Spanish government's financial report. After all, whether it is reform or construction, a lot of pesetas are needed. If you don't pay attention to the government's financial situation, you may not know when the country will go bankrupt. Prime Minister Primo actually had a lot to say about the government's financial situation. Your Majesty, according to the 1870 financial report compiled by the Ministry of Finance, our situation is relatively good, and it is expected to maintain a relatively stable growth in 1871. Prime Minister Primo smiled and seemed to relax a little when he mentioned the economic situation in Spain. Economic development is always a chain reaction. Although it seems that the government has reduced taxes on farmers, once farmers have money, whether they deposit it in the bank or spend it, it can also stimulate Spain's fiscal growth. In addition, with the various construction projects in Spain, many jobs with per capita income levels have been created, which has been welcomed by many Spaniards. The most popular workers at the moment, although the work in the steel mills is hard, they can really make money. If nothing else, the integrated steel mill in Carlo alone employed more than 400 workers in 1870, and there would be even more across Spain. As people become richer, their consumption level will naturally increase steadily. People's consumption can also stimulate the development of various industries, and Spain's economy will naturally rise. If Spain during the reign of Queen Isabel was more like a pool of stagnant and turbid water, then Spain today is more like living water connected to rivers, because the various construction projects advocated by the government and the royal family are gradually revitalizing the entire economic system. Carlo nodded, looking like he was listening attentively. The royal family alone made a lot of money during this period, and the government's fiscal revenue should have increased significantly. After all, the royal family has become a major taxpayer of the government so far, and the tax paid to the government in 1870 was as high as 1 million pesetas. According to incomplete statistics, the gross national product of our country in 1870 was about 6.1828 billion pesetas, an increase of about 1.5% compared with 1869. The fiscal revenue was about 352.48 million pesetas, accounting for about 5.7% of the GDP. Our fiscal expenditure reached 412.8 million pesetas, and the fiscal deficit was as high as 60 million pesetas. However, because we issued national debt and received war reparations from Morocco, we were able to make up for our fiscal deficit. Prime Minister Primo handed Carlo a detailed report on Spain's finances and explained, "It is also the king's right to understand the country's development." Primo will naturally not refuse Carlo's understanding of the country's situation. After all, a king who is indifferent to state affairs is not a good thing. 60 million pesetas fiscal deficit? Carlo had a headache. Originally, Carlo was in a good mood when he heard that Spain's total fiscal revenue was as high as 352.48 million pesetas. But after hearing that the fiscal deficit in 1870 alone was as high as 60 million pesetas, Carlo's mood was not so good again. 60 million pesetas. Converted into pounds, it is nearly 2.3 million, which is definitely a huge sum of money. Where did the 60 million pesetas go? Carlo asked hurriedly. All kidding aside, the total assets of the royal family have not yet exceeded 60 million pesetas. Even the total savings of the Royal United Bank barely reach this figure. The Spanish government's fiscal deficit is as high as 60 million pesetas a year. Doesn't this mean that in just 1 year the government's losses will be equivalent to the total property of the royal family? Primo had anticipated Carlo's question. He was not panicked at all when he heard the question. He smiled and explained, "Your Majesty, our major expenses are currently divided into 3 items. The first is military expenditure, which accounts for 25.1% of the total fiscal expenditure. Every year, about 103.6 million pesetas are spent on military expenditure. The remaining 2 items were railway construction and industrial construction. In 1870, we built more than 500 kilometers of railways and 4,000 kilometers of roads, as high as 23%, and our expenses on transport construction amount to 95 million pesetas. Although industrial construction was not so exaggerated, our spending on purchasing means of production from abroad, building industrial bases, and encouraging private enterprises was also as high as 70 million pesetas. Taking into account other expenses such as education, healthcare, and government employees' salaries, 412.8 million pesetas is the result of the government's many savings. If Spain wants to achieve reform and industrial expansion, it will be impossible to achieve it without investing huge amounts of money. Spain's industrial technology is already backward, and it needs to purchase a large amount of industrial equipment and related scientific and technological information from abroad. At the same time, building factories, laying production lines, and recruiting workers all cost money, which is why the Spanish government's fiscal expenditure remains high. But all this is paying off. At least in Primo's view, these expenditures are expected to bear fruit in the next 3 years and have an impact on Spain's economic development. The various factories and enterprises that have continued to spring up in Spain during this period alone are destined to usher in a period of stable growth in the Spanish economy in the future. This is also the reason why Primo is willing to spend such a huge amount of money on the government, because there will be rewards for every effort, and the funds spent will continue to return to the government in various ways, and will also allow the government to earn more in the future. After hearing Prime Minister Primo's reply, Carlo nodded, and his doubts were dispelled. Although Spain did not have a large navy, it also spent a lot on military expenditures, especially in 1870, when it experienced the Cuban War of Independence and the Carlos Rebellion, both of which cost a lot of military expenditures. In addition, the Spanish government needs to maintain an army of more than 100,000 people, so military expenditure is actually not much, and is already within a reasonable range. Fortunately, the indemnity from Morocco allowed Spain to basically offset its fiscal losses in 1870. Coupled with the loan from the Italian government and the total fiscal revenue for the whole year of 1871, the subsequent Spanish government is still confident enough to deal with new construction and expenditure. Ultimately, it was because of the independence activists in Cuba and the Philippines that Spain was forced to maintain an army of more than 100,000 people. After all, these 2 regions not only love independence, but are also very far away from the Spanish mainland. Every time the rebellion is suppressed, the government has to pay a heavy price. No matter what the final outcome of the war is, it is actually a loss for the Spanish government. Carlo nodded and continued to ask his own question. Is the available fiscal budget for next year sufficient? If next year's fiscal deficit is still huge, I'm afraid no one will come to help us fill the gap. Prime Minister Primo had actually already considered this issue. The government's available fiscal budget is close to 150 million pesetas, plus next year's fiscal revenue. There will be no problem in continuing our construction. 1871 is expected to be a peaceful year, and if there is no war, our military expenditure should be able to be reduced to around 75 million pesetas. The reduced military spending can be used for railway and highway construction or industrial expansion, or to continue popularizing literacy education, which is basically enough to meet the government's financial needs in the new year. although Spain's fiscal revenue is as high as 352.48 million pesetas. In fact, many of the government's expenditures are fixed, and there is basically no way to reduce them. This is why Prime Minister Primo needs to be careful with millions of pesetas. If the fiscal revenue of 352.48 million pesetas seems to be a lot, but it is only about $65.21 million when converted into US dollars, and only £13.531 million when converted into British pounds. If this amount of money is only used for a few key projects, it may be able to achieve certain results. However, if you want to build a comprehensive and multifaceted project, it is a bit too idealistic. Carlo's goal was very simple: to influence the government to focus on the construction of heavy industry as much as possible. The secondary goals were literacy education and infrastructure construction, and everything else could be put on hold for the time being. There is not much room for development in areas like healthcare and agriculture. Spain's land situation means that the upper limit of agriculture is limited. It is difficult to achieve self-sufficiency, let alone export agricultural products on a large scale. Medical care is completely limited by current technology. If you invest money in medical care, you may not be able to get your money back in 10 years. For the Spanish government, which is short of funds, these two projects can be temporarily abandoned for now, and attention should be focused on more profitable heavy industries. Carlo certainly has the power to make suggestions on some of the government's work. Prime Minister Primo did not object to Carlo's suggestions. He just didn't want Carlo to interfere too much in the government's work and impose his own ideas on the government to implement. Your idea is the same as mine, Your Majesty. Primo nodded, obviously approving of Carlo's idea. For Spain now, the development of agriculture and medical care can be postponed for a while. At present, the government's focus will be on the construction of heavy industry and railways, and it will also do its best to promote the popularization of literacy education. Until Spain has enough money in its budget, other construction projects can be put on hold. Currently, only heavy industry, education, and infrastructure are the most important to us. The first update of 3,000 words. Please support. It's the 6th day of daily updates, and 3,000 words have been updated. Please support. Chapter 99 Agriculture Future Plan. The good news is that, because most of the cabinet ministers know that Carlo does not interfere much in government affairs, few ministers will come to the palace in person at the beginning of each year to meet Carlo and seek more departmental financial budgets. The bad news is that every year, when the budget is being fought over, the ministers seem to have actively forgotten Carlo to be serving Prime Minister Primo, but it was only because Prime Minister Primo supported Carlo's monarchical rule that they also supported the Spanish monarchy in disguise. Fortunately, Antonio Cánovas del Castillo, the recently appointed Minister of Agriculture, knew his limits. With the arrival of 1871, Antonio Cánovas del Castillo arrived at the palace on time to meet with Carlo, in order to report to him the achievements of the agricultural department last year, and to express his loyalty to Carlo. Secondly, he wanted to seek more financial budget for the agricultural sector through Carlo. Regardless of whether it would be successful or not, he was bound to make this trip. Because Antonio Cánovas del Castillo was recommended by Carlo himself for the position of Minister of Agriculture, he was labeled as a member of Carlo's faction from the very beginning. If we try to please Prime Minister Primo at this time, not only will there be no good results, but we will offend both Prime Minister Primo and Carlo. It would be better to be loyal to Carlo wholeheartedly. As the Minister of Agriculture appointed by Carlo himself, Prime Minister Primo would not make things difficult for him unless he decided to turn against Carlo. What's more, Antonio Cánovas del Castillo himself was ambitious. He had served as a cabinet minister during the reign of Queen Isabel, and naturally he was not satisfied with being a small agricultural minister at this time. To be honest, 7 years ago his position had already surpassed that of Minister of Agriculture. At this time, Antonio Cánovas del Castillo was thinking more about how to take the next step and become the Prime Minister of Spain. In theory, this is entirely feasible. First of all, Cánovas is a dozen years younger than Primo and Serrano, so even if he can hold out, he can still hold out until Primo and Serrano retire. Through his last contact with Carlo, Canavas had already understood that Carlo would never be willing to become a constitutional king without any power. It would not end well for a powerful prime minister like Primo to be with a young and ambitious king like Carlo. Even if Carlo would not eventually liquidate Prime Minister Primo, it was certain that he would gradually control the government's voice behind Prime Minister Primo. As Carlo's first chess piece in the government, Antonio Canavas del Castillo was well aware of his importance to Carlo. As long as he does not betray Carlo, he will definitely be reused in the future. After all, Antonio Canavas del Castillo represents not only himself, but also many old officials who have entered the political arena during the reign of Queen Isabel. The loyalty of these old ministers to the monarchy was unquestionable. Carlo had previously doubted their loyalty to him, but as long as Canavas continued to express his loyalty and used his influence to make these old ministers return to Carlo's rule, he would become Carlo's confidant. These old ministers who once served Queen Isabel also have considerable influence in the political arena. By uniting them, Antonio Canavas del Castillo can also achieve his goal, which is to run for the position of Prime Minister of Spain after Prime Minister Primo, and become the head of the national government of Spain, above one person, and below 10,000 people. Although Carlo did not below 10,000 people show it on the surface, he was quite satisfied with Canavas's understanding. If Canavas did not even know who he really needed to be loyal to, then Carlo would have to start reconsidering the candidate for Minister of Agriculture. Once you doubt someone's loyalty, the best option is to abandon him directly. If you doubt someone, but still reuse him, unless he holds real power and cannot be abandoned, you are walking on a knife's edge, and if things go wrong, both sides will suffer. Minister Canavas, are you used to the position of Minister of Agriculture? Carlo asked with a smile, looking at Canavas, whose face was full of loyalty. I'm used to it, Your Majesty, thank you for your concern. The current Spanish government, under the leadership of you and Prime Minister Primo, is making steady progress in all developments, including the agricultural sector. So far, there haven't been any major problems in the agricultural sector. Farmers' incomes are growing steadily, and our food production is also increasing to a small extent. Antonio Canavas del Castillo quickly replied. Although Carlo only asked him whether he could adapt to the agricultural sector, he still answered the question about the current situation of the agricultural sector. Although Carlo did not ask about some things proactively, the best way is to report the situation of the agricultural department truthfully on time. He was definitely a smart man. Since he had decided to be loyal to Carlo in exchange for the opportunity to move to a higher position, he should not have any other thoughts. This was also the experience that Canavas' long political career brought him. Don't treat others as fools, even if they are just young kings like Carlo who are not even 20 years old. Some political tactics might be able to deceive Carlo in the short term, but once discovered by Carlo, he might face the king's wrath and the royal power's accountability. Never underestimate the power of a king, even if he is just a powerless king under a constitutional monarchy. It may be troublesome to target a force, but if it is just one person, there are simply too many means available, and you don't even need to use your own means. You can just rely on the power of the outside world. Carlo nodded, very satisfied with his choice of Canavas as Minister of Agriculture. Regardless of other things, Canavas's understanding has already made Carlo quite satisfied. As for those ministers who looked down on him, Carlo would not directly express his attitude, but when Prime Minister Primo left the center of power, Carlo would be waiting for them to settle accounts. Your Majesty, the Ministry of Agriculture does not have many plans for the new year. They mainly focus on the popularization and promotion of chemical fertilizers and the establishment of a state-owned grain company. If chemical fertilizers are widely popularized, it is expected that our crop yields can be effectively increased without much change in the total cultivated land area, and the expected increase is at least more than 5%. The state-owned grain company will take over the bulk grain trade, such as being responsible for grain import and export trade, etc. After the tax on farmers is reduced, the next period of time will be a golden development stage for agriculture. It is expected that in the next 3 years, China's total grain output and total cultivated land area will increase. We can fully achieve self-sufficiency in grain production and seek a certain degree of grain export. Seeing that Carlo was satisfied with his attitude, Antonio Canavas del Castillo began to report the agricultural department's plan for the next year and seek Carlo's attitude. Due to funding constraints, the agricultural sector will not take much action in the next year. Overall, it will promote the use of fertilizers and develop new fertilizer technologies. Although the technology of fertilizer has been around for nearly 30 years, it took nearly 100 years for it to be fully commercialized. Europeans at the beginning of the century didn't even know how plants grew potassium salt. The former was born less than 30 years ago, and the latter was born less than 10 years ago. The relevant technology is still very primitive. But Spain had no choice at this time. Compared with Britain, France, and Germany, which have many plains, Spain has a large land area, but most of the land is plateaus and mountains. The only areas suitable for planting are a small amount of mixed mountain plains in the eastern and southern coastal areas. The barren land has already lagged behind other powerful countries in terms of food production. Although it occupies a larger area, Spain's per capita food production is not much better than that of the powerful countries. If Spain's climate was not suitable for growing vegetables and fruits, it would be a question whether it could achieve food self-sufficiency. Currently, the output of vegetables, fruits, and melons accounts for 25.7% of the total agricultural output in Spain. It is precisely because of such abundant output of vegetables, fruits, and melons that the Spaniards can seek to eat more abundantly while having enough food to eat. In addition, because Spain has a large coastline, it can also harvest a lot of seafood products every year. At this time, there is no need to worry about the impact of nuclear radiation on fish in the ocean, and seafood can basically be eaten with confidence. Because the train lines around Spain have been fully built, Carlo can also enjoy a variety of seafood products from the seaside. This also made Carlo feel lucky that he was in Spain. If he was in a food desert like the UK, even if there was seafood, it would probably not taste good. After hearing Canavas report on the agricultural sector's plan for next year, Carlo nodded without any objection. I agree with your plan, Minister Canavas. I hope that Spanish agriculture will continue to grow under your leadership, which will be a good thing for both Spain and you. Canavas nodded respectfully. He certainly understood what Carlo was talking about. As the Minister of Agriculture, the steady growth of agriculture in Spain must be a political achievement for him. Only after accumulating political achievements and reputation in the government can Canavas seek a higher cabinet position or even compete for the seat of Prime Minister. After all, if you don't have any political achievements and reputation, you will have no advantage in competing with others, whether it is the people's vote or the House of Representatives election. To become Prime Minister, one must be capable and have the support of the people and members of the House of Representatives. If he fails to win the support of the people, even with Carlo's strong support, he is destined to be unable to sit on the throne of the Prime Minister of Spain. The second update of 3,200 words. Please support. It's the 6th day of daily updates of 10,006,210,000 have been updated today. Please support. The last update will be posted before 2 o'clock. Chapter 100 High Education, High Income. In order to reduce the illiteracy rate in Spain as soon as possible, Carlo did everything he could. On the first day of 1871, Carlo asked several newspapers under the royal family to publish articles about the fact that education determines income, and promoted the idea that high education and high income are the key. The example is also very simple. The average income of college graduates far exceeds the average income in Spain. In particular, some specially hired college students earn several times more than ordinary people students. The newspaper also cited several examples of ordinary people with primary and secondary education who earned higher incomes after entering factories than ordinary people without education. Entering the factory requires operating equipment. Spaniards to participate. Although it is free, under the policy of voluntary participation, the results of literacy education are not as good as expected. Most of those who participate in literacy education are children or young people of appropriate age, and there are very few young and middle-aged men over 25 years old participating. This is actually easy to understand. Although literacy education is free, it will delay their time to enter the factory to earn money. As one gains, the other loses, and it is no different from them losing money. Although the Spanish also understand the importance of education, each family often chooses to let younger children participate in literacy education, while adults work in exchange for income to support the entire family. Only when all Spaniards understand that the time they spend on literacy education will not be a waste, but will be rewarded with higher wages in the future. Newspapers with different target groups such as the Madrid Workers' Daily and the Agricultural Daily were also specially created to expand the number of people that the newspapers can influence. There are at least 2 newspapers in the top 5 cities in Spain. With such large-scale newspaper publicity, I believe that many people will accept the concept of high education and high income, and will actively improve the education level of themselves and their families. In order to hide the dozens or even hundreds of newspapers under his control, Butler Lauren has taken great pains. Except for the Spanish Sun, which is an open royal business, the other newspapers are basically disguised to look like private businesses. It's not that Carlo is too defensive. It's just that some newspapers, in order to maintain their market size and sell their newspapers, often publish some gossip or even sexy pictures. These news and pictures will be warmly welcomed by the Spaniards, and the lower classes will also be willing to feast their eyes on the sexy girls in the newspapers. But if the royal industry publishes these news, it will inevitably give the public a bad impression that the royal family and the king love gossip and sexy girls. Although most people are happy to read such newspapers, if the newspaper belongs to the royal family, it is inevitable that some upright people will come out to condemn the royal family. Carlo had been fully prepared for this. Enterprises like steel mills that can create a large number of jobs for Spain and will not exploit workers will be made public to tell the public that they are royal enterprises. In order to speed up the popularization of literacy education, Carlo came up with a solution, and after calculations he believed it was feasible, calculations were accurate. Carlo called Prime Minister Primo and put forward his proposal. That is, the government would provide free dinner for all people participating in literacy education on the day of the literacy education. Literacy education is completely different from primary education. Each class lasts more than 3 hours. Literacy education can generally be completed within 5 months. If children and teenagers who do not need to work receive literacy education every day, most of the literacy education tasks can be completed within a month. But no matter what, Carlo's proposal is quite bold. Considering that more than 1 million people received literacy education last year, providing them with a dinner when they receive literacy education would be equivalent to providing at least 50 meals for 1 million people, for a total of 50 million dinners. Such a large-scale dinner would certainly not be too luxurious, but even if it was just relatively cheap whole grain bread and vegetables, and a small amount of meat, it would cost at least 5 million pesetas. When Prime Minister Primo heard Carlo's proposal, he was stunned at first, but after careful thinking and calculation, he suddenly felt that this method was feasible. For the government, the cost of 5 million pesetas is not unacceptable. By providing a free dinner to attract more people to participate in literacy education, the Spanish government will also benefit in the end. Even if the population doubles, it will not be a big burden for the government. The current world environment is tending towards peace, and it is entirely possible to purchase grain from major grain producing countries and then make it into relatively cheap food to provide to the people. Nowadays, people are not so particular about food safety. As long as the food provided looks acceptable and can fill people's stomachs, they will naturally be satisfied. Although it is just a simple dinner, there will definitely be many Spaniards who want to save money and receive literacy education in order to save the money for a dinner. After all, literacy education is free, and I believe most people would be willing to accept 2 hours of learning in exchange for a free dinner. Providing free dinner is also a good reputation. Whether for the government or Carlo, it can increase his influence in the hearts of the people. As for the additional cost of at least 5 million pesetas, it was not so important at this time. After all, Spain's fiscal deficit last year was as high as 60 million pesetas. Compared with this amount of money, the additional cost of 5 million pesetas was nothing. After careful consideration in his mind, Prime Minister Primo finally agreed to Carlo's proposal. That is, the government would provide a free dinner to all people participating in literacy education. However, Carlo also put forward his own request. That is, when the government provides this free dinner, it should not forget the contribution of the royal family. Carlo does not intend to let the government take all the credit. For Carlo, anything that can improve the Spanish people's favorability towards him is not to be missed. This is not only related to the stability of his throne, but also to his influence on the government in the future. If he wants to ensure that he can infiltrate the government as he wishes after Prime Minister Primo retires, he must ensure that the attitude of most Spaniards is supportive of him. If even the Spanish do not support him, after Prime Minister Primo retires, Carlo should consider whether he can keep his throne instead of interfering in government issues. After hearing Carlo's request, Prime Minister Primo certainly understood what Carlo's purpose was. However, Carlo's request would not affect him, so Prime Minister Primo would naturally not oppose Carlo. After all, he could still gain favors. Of course, Your Majesty, it was you who proposed the free dinner, and the Spanish people will certainly not forget your love for the Spanish people. Prime Minister Primo nodded and said with a smile. Whether it was Carlo's previous proposal to exchange the colonial governor for the Minister of Agriculture, or his current proposal to share the public's favor, it was actually related to the public's support. Prime Minister Primo certainly understood what Carlo wanted to do, but he had no intention of stopping Carlo. As a politician and reformer, Prime Minister Primo clearly understands his purpose. Rather than fighting for power and enjoying the dictatorial experience brought by the monopoly of power, it is better to say that he wants to quickly promote reforms in Spain by monopolizing power. For Prime Minister Primo, he never thought about how long he would stay in the position of Spanish Prime Minister. As long as he could complete the reform of Spain, he would be satisfied, and he did not expect the fame and influence that the reform would bring to him. Carlo also understood this, so he was very confident in Prime Minister Primo when exchanging political interests. This is also the biggest difference between Western monarchy and Eastern monarchy. Europeans pay the most attention to bloodline. It is too difficult for ordinary people to become kings through a coup. Even in the long history of Europe, there have only been a few such cases. Family. This also includes the Napoleon family's multiple marriages with other European royal families, which made the family one of the orthodox royal family in Europe. But after the fall of the Napoleonic Empire, the influence of the Napoleonic family has rapidly weakened. If it weren't for the arrival of Napoleon III and the fact that France was indeed very powerful during the Napoleonic era, the Napoleonic family would have long been lost in history. This means that most of the European prime ministers who hold absolute power cannot ascend to the throne through a coup. Even if they are ambitious, most people want to sideline the king and enjoy the dictatorship of being prime minister. For politicians like Primo who do not actually have such great ambitions for power, monopolizing power is not what they pursue, but realizing their political ideals and ambitions. The reason why he did not oppose Carlo's opinions too much, and even cooperated with Carlo in political interests was because Prime Minister Primo deeply understood that reformers had never had a good ending since ancient times. His friendship with Carlo was not only to pave the way for his own departure from politics, but also to let Carlo know that he himself did not have much ambition for power, and he also hoped that Carlo would not interfere too much in his reforms. Although the two did not say it explicitly, they had reached some tacit understanding. They both understood that after Prime Minister Primo completed the reform, he was destined to unload the burden of the Prime Minister. The reform government has offended a large number of vested interests. If Primo remains in the Prime Minister's seat after the reform is completed, it will inevitably have an impact on the country's stability. And Carlo did not want such a person who had successfully promoted reforms and had great influence in both political and military circles to continue to stay in the position of prime minister. The saying "a man who is too successful will become a threat to his ruler" is not said in vain. Although political differences were partly the reason why William II dismissed Prime Minister Bismarck, it was also possible that Bismarck's achievements were too great to be true. As the initiator of the two wars, the Austro-Prussian War and the Franco-Prussian War, which were planned for Prussia to unify Germany, Prime Minister Bismarck enjoyed unprecedented prestige in the Kingdom of Prussia and the German Empire. It is no exaggeration to say that Bismarck's influence on Germany even exceeded that of William I, who founded the German Empire. Although Bismarck and William I had a good friendship, they also trusted each other very much. But the problem is that there was no friendship between Bismarck and William II. As the newly appointed emperor, William II naturally could not accept that there was another person threatening his power. The situation in Spain in the future is the same. Carlo naturally cannot accept a prime minister who threatens his royal power. Regardless of whether Prime Minister Primo's reforms are successful or not, he must bid farewell to the prime minister's throne and be his own nobleman peacefully. Because both of them understood this, Carlo was generous in rewarding Prime Minister Primo. Prime Minister Primo has become the Duke of Spain, and his title has reached the highest point in Spain. The highest title among the nobility, Grand Duke, is prepared for after Prime Minister Primo completes his reforms. When he fully implemented the reforms in Spain and revitalized Spain's industry and economy, he became the top noble and Grand Duke in Spain. As long as Prime Minister Primo retired, Carlo would not be able to settle accounts with him. By then, the two Archdukes Primo and Serrano would become a good story in Spanish history, and along with Carlo's name, they would be sung by the Spanish people as Spain became stronger. After Prime Minister Primo agreed to his proposal, Carlo achieved his purpose of summoning Prime Minister Primo. After having a sumptuous lunch with Prime Minister Primo, Carlo began his lazy life in the new year, while Prime Minister Primo began to be busy with Carlo's recent opinions. 10,210,000 views have been updated. Please support. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.